all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
That's right, folks. From the mountains of Kentucky to the bayous of Louisiana, broadcasting online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio Studios in Huntsville, Alabama. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, Adam Keller. Today, we break down the big news that everybody is talking about with folks directly involved. Also, Samsung workers in South Korea are gearing up for a strike, and Mexican auto manufacturers are violating workers' rights. All that and more on today's program. If you want to be part of the show today, we've got a phone number and the line is open. You can call 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also leave a voicemail throughout the week, and we might respond to it on the next program. Just a reminder, if you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap up here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, you can find us anywhere you find anything online, in particular at our website, tvlr.fm. You can also make a donation at tvlr.fm/donate on a one-time or recurring monthly basis. You can find our merch. We have logo caps back in stock. It's a black standard ball cap at tvlr.fm/store for $35 plus shipping and handling. And you can also become a patron at patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. And if you're a member of a local union or organization that might be interested in running some ads on the program, you can reach out to us for more details about sponsorships. We couldn't do it without the support of organized labor.
That's right, and let me add a disclaimer that any viewpoints or opinions expressed in this program belong solely to their author and do not necessarily represent any organization or sponsor. We welcome all of our listeners, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, Unclaimed Mysteries Internet Radio, WVNN, WZZA, WHIV, WMMT, or through your favorite podcast app. We are proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network and encourage our listeners to check it out. And as most of you know, we are not media professionals, just some diehard union brothers who believe that Alabama and the South's labor movement and working class deserve a bigger platform. We're hoping this project can make a difference on that front, and we could not do it without you. We want to thank everyone for tuning in. Whether you're a loyal fan or a first-time listener, we really appreciate you spending some time with us this morning.
Absolutely. We've got a great show lined up for you. First off, we're going to go ahead and get to last week in Southern labor. So this is what workers in the U.S. South and the American colonies were up to from May 24th to May 31st. In new union campaigns, 88 workers, traffic flaggers at the Southern Protection Agency in Lexington, North Carolina, filed a petition to hold a union election with the Labor's International Union of North America, LIUNA, Local 919. 26 workers at Amentum in Beaufort, South Carolina, filed a petition to hold a union election with the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, IAMAW. 3 workers at Midwest Air Traffic Control Services in Hollister, Missouri, filed a petition to hold a union election with the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, NATCA. 6 workers at Petro Technologies in Broussard, Louisiana, filed a petition to hold a union election with the IAMAW. The employer filed a petition to hold a union election after a majority of the 203 workers at Walsh and Albert in Houston, Texas, demonstrated support for unionization with the Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Union, SMART, Local 54. Workers likely pushed by their employer filed a petition to decertify the United Steelworkers, USW, Local 507G-02, as the union representing the 26 workers at Emery's Fused Minerals in Greenville, Tennessee. 5 units at Corporacion Sanos in Caguas, Puerto Rico, comprising of 14 nurses, 2 drivers, 8 pharmacy and x-ray technicians, 23 office clerks, and 3 social workers, respectively, filed a petition to hold a union election with ULEES. 550 workers at Pico Foods in West Point, Mississippi, filed a petition to hold a union election with the United Food and Commercial Workers, UFCW, Local 1529. If I remember correctly, they filed last year and either withdrew the petition or lost the election, so better luck this time. 2 workers at Jones Lang and LaSalle in Washington, D.C., filed a petition to hold a union election with the International Union of Operating Engineers, IUOE, Local 99. 7 workers at J-Pat's Logistics Services in Enid, Oklahoma, filed a petition to hold a union election with the IAMAW, but withdrew the petition in the same week. Workers likely pushed by their employer filed a petition to decertify the Service Employees International Union, SEIU, District 1199, as the union representing the 105 workers at Putnam Company in St. Albans, West Virginia. In campaign updates, municipal workers at the Monongalia County Commission office in West Virginia have been seeking to have a union election with the United Mine Workers of America, UMWA, but so far, the commission office has been obstructing the process. The union is asking for community members to sign a petition in support of the workers' right to unionize, and the union's political committee has rescinded its endorsement of the Monongalia County Commissioner Thomas Bloom in his re-election bid because he voted against allowing an election to move forward. Fairfax County, Virginia educators will be voting in several union elections this week between June the 3rd and June the 10th, the culmination of an alliance between the NEA and the AFT affiliate unions in the area. This is not a merger of affiliates. Rather, they divided the turf and are supporting each other's organizing activities. Workers at Corning in Tarboro, North Carolina, rallied in support of their union campaign last week. They filed to hold an election with the USW 2 weeks ago. Of seven Corning plants in North Carolina, only 1 is unionized with the Steelworkers Union. According to the new disclosures with the Labor Department, Mercedes hired at least 11 persuaders from 3 different contractors to support their anti-union campaign in Tuscaloosa. The going rate for these types of consultants is $3,200 per consultant per day. The total bill could easily be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars just for the anti-union consultants, not counting all of the labor time that the new CEO put in himself, but we won't know the exact total until next year, when the amount has to be disclosed. In election results, 18 workers at Starbucks in River Ridge, Louisiana voted 8-5 in favor of unionization with Starbucks Workers United, as did 13 workers at Starbucks in North Little Rock, Arkansas, 10-0, and 18 workers in Tampa, Florida, 13-5. 6 workers at Wells Fargo in Fort Worth, Texas voted unanimously in favor of unionization with Wells Fargo Workers United, CWA. 53 workers at 10 Roads Express in Greensboro, North Carolina voted 29-13 in favor of unionization with the Teamsters Local 391. 6 workers at Corson Fire and Security in Louisville, Kentucky voted 2-6 against unionization with the Road Sprinkler Fitters Union Local 669, a UA affiliate. 78 workers at United Natural Foods voted unanimously in favor of unionization with the Teamsters Local 769. 54 workers at Miami City Ballet in Miami Beach, Florida voted 20-31 against unionization with the American Guild of Musical Artists, and 23 workers at Akima Systems Engineering in Panama City Beach, Florida, voted 8-0 in favor of unionization with the IAMAW. In strikes and bargaining updates, municipal workers for the city of Durham, North Carolina, and members of UE Local 150 are rallying at the city budget hearing to demand reclassification of solid waste workers, moving them up one classification title, which would result in a raise. UE 150 says that of the $28 million available to the city for raises this year, the majority is going to cops and management, not the city's low-wage workers. Axios is touting Julie Sue's role in helping workers at Bluebird in Georgia secure a first contract after unionizing with the steelworkers. They cite as evidence for this the Biden administration's green initiatives generally, with Bluebird slated to be the recipient of some $60 million in funding from the EPA's Clean School Bus program, and Sue's personal interventions with management, having urged them to bargain in good faith. The Union of Southern Service Workers and Step Up Louisiana rallied at Dollar General headquarters in Goodlettsville during their annual shareholder meeting to demand safer working conditions. In an attempt to protect employees in the case of a second Trump term, federal employees at the EPA just secured a new contract through their union, AFGE Council 238, that includes, quote, groundbreaking protections for scientific integrity. The council's 13 local unions voted unanimously to ratify the new agreement. Members of UAW Local 286 at Penske Logistics in El Paso, Texas, went on strike after the company has refused to bargain in good faith for a first contract. Most workers make around $18 an hour with healthcare premiums of $180 per week. The 40 clerical workers are seeking to raise wages to at least $20 an hour. CWA members at Brightspeed, an internet provider in Alabama, North Carolina, and Virginia, are undergoing mobilization training to prepare for their contract expiration, which occurs between June the 1st and June the 7th for different groups of workers. Members are fighting for pay increases, staffing, and reasonable commutes. Workers at UFCW International in D.C., represented by the News Guild CWA, went on a one-day strike last week in protest of the UFCW's contract offer that fails to keep pace with inflation and has inadequate telework options. Integral Care, which is the largest mental health care provider in Travis County, Texas, and a government agency, currently employs its workers on an at-will basis. The union, United Workers of Integral Care, states that this has led to unjust dismissals, which means that workers are afraid to speak out, and that this has also led to a staffing crisis. The union is pushing for a just cause disciplinary program to be implemented, and the agency head said that he is, quote, ready to have a conversation with the union about it. The Baldwin County Library Cooperative in Baldwin County, Alabama, fired its entire staff last week. So far, no reasons have been given as to why, and 15,000 workers in Alabama are paid at or below minimum wage, according to a new study. In politics and legislative updates, the IRS is making its free tax filing platform permanent and open to all 50 states. Romney and Manchin have a fiscally irresponsible bill that would cap all telework for federal employees to 40% of workdays in a given pay period, with exceptions for military spouses or federal law enforcement. It does not make an exception for remote employees, which means that thousands of workers for the federal government would be forced to move across the country or be fired. Manchin said the reason for this legislation is that remote work, quote, hinders productivity despite providing no evidence. As an illustration of these issues, in the same week that this legislation was announced, AFGE Local 3810, which represents workers at the Economic Development Administration, says that a full 50% of their members are actively applying for jobs outside the agency, and 2/3 say that they would accept an offer if it was made, and said that further return to the office plans will exacerbate turnover and understaffing. In a new report, Alabama leaves millions of dollars from the federal food stamp program unused every year. 7 school districts in Alabama will get $7.865 million for 24 electric buses from the EPA's Clean School Bus program, which is slated to help particularly low-income, rural, and tribal communities. And finally, in internal union affairs, the United Campus Workers of Tennessee voted to join other Southern United Campus Workers chapters in CWA District 3. With that, we are going to go ahead and head to a break. We're going to be right back with leaders from the Fairfax Education Unions to talk about their campaign. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report. Benefit Architects has proudly supported union members and union-made products for over 35 years. If you are a federal employee and an AFGE member, you're eligible for hundreds of dollars in money-saving benefits, including group life insurance, dental insurance, and AFLAC insurance. Additionally, if you're a union member but don't work for the federal government, you can still qualify for several of these money-saving policies. So give Tate Hure a call at 256-215-6769 for details and to enroll. Again, that is Tate Hure at 256-215-6769.
In Alabama, more than 200,000 of our friends and family members are living without health care coverage. Often folks can't stay healthy enough even to keep their jobs. We can fix this. It's time for us to find a way to close the health care coverage gap so that people can remain at work. Let's make this a priority. Let's close this gap and cover Alabama. To learn more and how you can help, visit coveralabama.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
Attention union members, membership organizations, podcasters, or anyone with a payment processing need. The future is here, and your organization needs to be prepared by working with Unionly. With Unionly, your union or organization can take payments on a mobile device, eliminating processing fees, giving you a better price than other payment processing methods, while at the same time supporting a union-friendly business with a specialized skill set to meet your needs. Your members will thank you when they pay their dues at their convenience without waiting in line to deposit cash or check. Start preparing for the future today by calling 206-595-8631 or visiting unionly.io.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
I'm attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, You need a lawyer who's with you.
Sinyard Law.
You need attorneys always available to take care of you.
Sinyard Law.
And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Sinyard Law.
And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case.
Sinyard Law.
A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Sinyard Law. The name with proven results.
Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth should go to labor, and you are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host Adam Keller. If you've got anything to add, you can give us a call at 844-899-8857. Might take your call here in a bit. We've got some folks from Fairfax County, Virginia on the line. Really quick before we get to them, though, wanted to let y'all know about this situation in South Korea, where for the first time ever, 28,000 Samsung workers in South Korea will strike if nothing is done by June the 7th. LG, Hyundai, SK, and Samsung are the four most successful family-run companies in South Korea, with the leaders of those companies becoming something of a new aristocracy in the country. As with other aristocracies, they do not always treat the people below them well. That's what the National Samsung Electronics Union, NSEU, is saying about the company today. Representing about 28,000 workers, which is a fifth of the company's 125,000-person workforce, the union is threatening a one-day strike on June the 7th as an escalatory measure against the company during bargaining. Specifically, the union is not happy with the company's offer of a 5% raise, saying that they want a 6% raise, another day of annual leave, and transparent performance-based bonuses. NSEU President Son Woo-mok said that the company has never properly negotiated with NSEU, only announcing their proposals once a year at a labor management conference and telling the union to accept it. That's not how negotiations work. The company is citing as one reason for not meeting the union's demands the underperformance of some of its businesses. But NSEU President Woo-mok pointed out that this has been the position of the company for the past 10 years, and indeed, even though it has had its weakest annual performance since 2009 in 2023, the profit was still $4.8 billion US dollars. That's the profit, not the revenue, the profit, in their weakest annual performance since 2023, so they clearly have the money. And Samsung is expecting increased performance from its AI products, reporting a 10-fold rise in first quarter operating profits amid predictions of high demand for AI and their microchips. While NSEU is the biggest union at Samsung, there are many others, and it is unclear if all of the other unions are going to be joining the job action. Some unions are coming out publicly in opposition to the move, saying that they would not support the job action and accusing NSEU of pursuing a combative agenda and affiliation with the more militant of Korea's two labor federations over improving working conditions at the company. While both the company and the union say that a one-day strike would have minimal impact on production, NSEU is threatening an open-ended strike if Samsung does not capitulate. And Nikkei Asia reports that Kim Yangpen, a senior researcher at the Korea Institute for Industrial Economics and Trade, said that if a Samsung fabrication facility stops due to a labor strike, it could cause more damage to the company than the April earthquake in Taiwan did to Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. This is pulling reporting from Reuters, CNN, and Nikkei Asia. So really interesting story there. We're going to keep an eye on that to see what happens. Heading back to the United States, in Fairfax County, Virginia, that's the big news that everybody's talking about, right? I mean, I've been hearing about big news that everyone's talking about, that's been in the news for the last couple of days, really, important. And I'm not aware of anything bigger than the 27,000 person union election happening at Fairfax County education facilities next week between June the 3rd and June the 10th. So I had to get on people at the center of the big news Leslie Houston, Fairfax County Education Association President, and David Walrod, Fairfax County Federation of Teachers President. Leslie, David, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us this morning. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, we're really excited about this. And so, just to get people up to speed, in Virginia, it had been for a long time, collective bargaining was not legal. There was not a legal process for collective bargaining for state and municipal workers. But in 2020, there was a law that allowed municipal governments to allow their workers to collectively bargain. And so that law was passed in 2020. They finally, in Fairfax County, got the School Board of Education to allow for collective bargaining in their schools. And so now, after all of those steps from 2020 to now, there's an election. And so I guess, Leslie, I'll start with you. Can you talk to us about that process, just the fight to get collective bargaining rights? What has that fight been like, and why is it so important?
So as you said, it took over 40 years to ensure that we would have
you have muted yourself. Leslie.
I'm sorry.
No, okay.
So House Bill 582 gave school boards and counties the right to the authority to have collective bargaining. And for us, we came in with a school board that was pro labor. And it went pretty easy for us in terms of getting collective bargaining. It took a while. The resolution process, I think, was the most tedious. It took us 18 months to figure it out. I think the contention for us with that was that they put 17 groups in a room, and there were two unions, FCFT and FEA. And that was a little bit of a hassle. So when the law went in effect in May 2021, we were ready. March 9th is when March 9th of 2022 is when the resolution, 2023 is when the resolution passed. And we were thrilled, we were excited, but then the hard work started. And the hard work consisted of making sure that our two organizations could work together. So we had already began the process of forming an alliance with our predecessors before David and I were president. And then we basically just took the ball and kept going. And we are now here as the Alliance of Fairfax Education Unions, working together. And while we have not merged our unions, we have come together to ensure that all of our members and non-members in the instructional and operational units will be represented by FEU.
And David, can you talk to us about the importance of that cooperation? Because, the NEA and the AFT really have, their affiliates across the country really have widely diverging relationships. There are some locals where they have some regions of the country where the NEA and the AFT affiliates have actually merged. They're the same union. They're one union, and they're affiliates of both the NEA and the AFT. And then there are other parts of the country where the local affiliates just absolutely hate each other. They're raiding one another's units, and they're doing everything that they can to destroy the other one. And so, you're not going all the way towards merging and becoming one union, but this is still, working in cooperation, with the other education union. It's much better, I think, as a union person, than trying to destroy one another. So talk to us about, how that happened and the importance of cooperation and building each other up instead of trying to tear each other down.
Well, thank you. You really hit on a lot of it. We know that in different parts of the country, the dynamic between NEA and AFT has looked different. You have places like the state of Montana, the state of Florida, UTLA, New York City. You have some places where they have gone to a merged local model. And you have other places like, I'll just go ahead and say, I know you're in Alabama. In the state of Alabama, we know that things are not quite as civil there between the two unions. But here in Fairfax County, for the longest time, I think both FEA and FCFT were very focused on providing service to our members because obviously for the longest time, collective bargaining was not an option. So we had difficulties between us, but at the same time, we were providing service for our members. FEA was providing service for their members, and we ran up against one another at times, but largely we were working towards the same things. We were working parallel to one another. However, once the General Assembly passed the collective bargaining bill, that made it clear that the way that we had done business up until now was not going to work. The way that we had done business up till now was not a winning formula. It was not a strategy for success, because ultimately the important factor here is not the Fairfax County Federation of Teachers, and the important factor is not the Fairfax Education Association. The important factor is not David Walrod, president of FCFT. The important factor is not Leslie Houston, president of FEA. The important people here are the 27,000 workers that we represent. And so what it really came down to is we're working together because it's more important than us. It's more important, like the work that we're doing, the work that we're trying to accomplish to build a union for 27,000 people, improving working conditions for 27,000 people, and more to the point, improving the learning conditions, improving learning outcomes for the 181,000 students that attend Fairfax County Public Schools. That's the most important thing.
Right. And, Leslie, you mentioned earlier that once you got the General Assembly passed the collective bargaining law allowing for public sector collective bargaining in the school board, passed the resolution allowing the education workers in Fairfax County to collectively bargain, you said now the hard work begins, right? That's when the hard work began. And so talk to us about what did that look like, as you're trying to build towards an election. You had work that you were doing within your own union, FEA, and in cooperation with FCFT. What did that look like to actually build to the point where we have an election now? We have an election happening next week. What did you do between that resolution passing and now?
Well, David and I didn't sleep. I'll tell you that much. So we started these large campaigns with our national unions, and we started bringing people in. We started going into the schools. We signed over 14,000 members. When I say that the hard work began, it was making sure we got access into the schools. After lobbying the General Assembly for a year, it was so important to make sure that we were able to actually reach not just our members, but to reach everyone. We divided up our turf. So FCFT there's 242 sites here in Fairfax County, approximately. We divided up our turf and we went to work. FEA went to the schools that they needed to go to, and FCFT went to the schools that they needed to go to, and then together we would come back and we would discuss what we did and how successful we were that day. And this was a daily thing. I can honestly say that we worked 7 days a week for at least 8 weeks to make sure that that we were able to get everyone signed to meet the threshold in instructional and operational operational units.
Right. And so the these campaigns don't just kind of come out of nowhere, and a lot of times there has to be some precipitating factors among the bargaining unit, among the employees, that make them interested in unionization. You know, I think I'm a union guy. I'm a union partisan. I think everybody should have a union, and I think if you have a good workplace, then that's even more of a reason to go ahead and unionize and lock it in so that they can't take it away if something changes. But not everybody's like me, and a lot of times, if there are not problems, then a union campaign is not really going to get off the ground. And so clearly this campaign has gotten off the ground. So, you know, David, what are some of the issues that teachers are facing in their classrooms that they are wanting to address in a collective bargaining agreement?
Well, you know, I think that there are a variety of factors that are coming into play. For one thing, last year, our health insurance benefits changed pretty dramatically, and they were changed with minimal to no input from the folks affected. And so I think that was definitely something that got a lot of folks to realize that we need to have a bigger voice. Another thing that happened was our Board of Supervisors, who is our primary funding source, specifically said that they were prioritizing the parts of the budget where there already was a collective bargaining agreement in place. And so I think one of the things that our folks are understanding is we're getting a smaller raise than our superintendent had hoped we would receive because they're prioritizing funding the folks that already have the CBA. And so getting folks to understand that our conditions will be better once we have a collective bargaining agreement in place. And so I think those are two definite things that we're seeing. But also in general, not just here in Fairfax County, but really around the country, we're seeing a shortage of teachers right now. We're seeing that a lot of folks are burning out of the profession. We're seeing that folks are no longer seeing education as a viable 30-year career. And, you know, we know that is not a positive outcome for students. We know that the best outcome for students is that you have teachers that learn, grow, and stay in the profession so that they can help, you know, nurture and grow those future educators. Like the ideal situation for education is really that you have folks that go into it wanting to make it a career, but a lot of folks aren't seeing that right now. And, you know, one of the things that we're seeing here specifically in Fairfax County that's affecting that is we're just asking so much of our teachers. We're asking so many hours. We're asking them to put in so much extra work. Here in Fairfax County, our elementary school teachers, just to give one example, there's been a regulation in place since 2014 that our elementary teachers are supposed to get 240 minutes a week, 4 hours a week of planning time. And as recently as a couple months ago, almost no elementary school teacher was actually getting 240 minutes of planning time 10 years after the regulation came in place. And so I think what folks are really understanding is it's one thing to have the district say, oh yeah, we'll give this to you, we'll give this to you, we'll give this to you. And another thing to have it down in a legal binding contract that they've signed off on, that we have signed off on, that we had a real voice in helping to craft. And so I think those are some of the things that we're really hoping to see addressed in the teachers unit. For our operational unit, one of the big things that I think our operational folks are really feeling is making sure that they have the tools that they need to do their jobs effectively, making sure that they have the time needed to do their jobs effectively, and just making sure that they have, you know, safe conditions in order to do their job. And so I think those are some of the big things that we're seeing, one of the big things that we're hearing, and some of the big drivers of this campaign.
I know that under the new law from the General Assembly, they're still not allowed to strike, but in some public sector collective bargaining laws, there are kind of prescribed boundaries on what you can and can't negotiate over. You know, so for federal employees, we cannot negotiate over salary, right? Because our salary is set by Congress. Do you have any limitations on what you can bargain over in Fairfax County, or is it pretty much kind of, you know, an open ball game, everything's on the table?
So no, we are allowed to, the first contract, we are allowed to bargain wages, benefits, and I think working conditions. And then there's a fourth that we meaning the bargaining units and the school system can come to an agreement upon, but we cannot strike.
Right. And so, Leslie, the David had a lot of things there. Does that, as far as why teachers are interested in organizing, does that all track with what you're seeing from the units that the FEA is organizing? Does that and is there anything else that you're hearing from teachers?
Absolutely. I mean, he hit the nail on the head. Everything that he said is absolutely correct. That is exactly what our staff is feeling. Our staff is overworked. And education is no longer the dream job where you get the summers off. And, right now, it's teachers, bus drivers, custodians, food service workers, everyone, we're just all stressed out. Education is just no longer the same. The biggest thing is what we're seeing here is the poor treatment of bus drivers in Fairfax County. So while we have had some issues in terms of having access to bathrooms and being able to choose their routes, that is something that we hope to one day bargain for them. I mean, it's while we are very excited that we have the instructional folk on board, we're excited to have the operational folk. Instructional assistants are on the operational side. They are the crust. I mean, they're the ones that help us in our classrooms. Instructional assistants are teachers.
Right.
But they're paid the least. It really makes me sad when I go to the mall and I see one of my members working a second job. You should only have to work one job in education to make it, to live in this county.
Right. And
that's
not, it's incredibly important. And unfortunately, it's not, we're seeing stuff like that all over the country. I mean, I've seen, AP teachers that were in my high school working second jobs at Dollar General and things like that. It's
very common.
Yeah.
Very common.
And they shouldn't have to do that. You have to have, I think in a lot of places, advanced degrees, not just bachelor's, but you have to have like masters and stuff, or at least it helps a lot if you have a master's to teach. And the idea that you have to have a second income from one person while you're teaching is really sad. It's a sad statement on the education system.
And yeah, I was just going to say the support staff, I really appreciate you bringing them into the conversation, Leslie, because they do so much to ensure our schools actually operate, right? They cannot operate without the support staff, from the bus drivers to the, custodians to the child nutrition workers. They all play an essential role, and it's unfortunate that all too often these folks are paid poverty wages. And, school districts know the impact that poverty has on our community. And so it's just wild that we would see school districts kind of replicate that through their own employment practices. And something you mentioned, David, earlier about the planning time, that is something that really resonates with me as a former educator, because in Alabama we have, unfortunately, even fewer regulations on planning time. And where we do have it, of course, it's not really enforceable, right? There's no mechanism to hold anyone accountable. And I think that's so exciting about getting collective bargaining for these public school employees, the ability to hold folks accountable. Like you said, it's in writing, it's enforceable. And then the whole new ball game begins, right? In terms of your work in enforcing the contract and educating members on the contract. I know that's going to be a whole new phase to it, and an exciting phase. But as an Alabama educator, it really means a lot to me to see this expansion of rights. I mean, this is a true expansion of democracy, and these educators will be able to have a voice at the table that they didn't have before. and that educators here in Alabama and Mississippi and so many other places currently lack. And that's really important, and that speaks to the hard work and organizing that y'all have been doing in Virginia.
Thank you. And one of the things that I think is really important just to understand, I think everybody knows this, but folks might not really think about this. Teacher working conditions are student learning conditions. The conditions that you ask teachers to work under are the conditions you're asking students to learn in. The conditions that you ask our cafeteria folks to work in, those are the conditions that our students eat in. The conditions that you ask our bus drivers to drive in, those are the conditions that you're asking our students to ride to school in. So by improving working conditions for educators and educational staff, you're improving the conditions that students go to school in, eat, learn it in. So that's one thing that I really think is important for everybody to really understand, is that it's not just about teachers, it's ultimately about the students. By improving conditions for teachers, you're improving conditions for students.
Right.
Amen. Amen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you take care of the people who are taking care of the students will be taken care of. That's the bottom line. That's the bottom line.
Leslie, I was talking to you yesterday, and I was mentioning how this seems like such a huge deal to me. And I said that 27,000 people, y'all could be potentially increasing the union density rate in Virginia by something like 10%. I was talking to Adam, and he said that might not be the case, because probably you're going to have a lot of these teachers that are already saying, like in these surveys and statistics, that yeah, I'm a union member, but and so maybe you won't be affecting the union density statistics in Virginia, but it's going to be a huge expansion of collective bargaining for workers in Virginia. And so even if it's not going to affect the union density statistics, it's a huge deal. And you said, and I asked both you and David about how what kind of support you've been seeing from from other unions and the AFL-CIO, and so David, being the leader of an AFT affiliate, could you talk about some of the support that you have been seeing from the AFL-CIO since the AFT is an AFL-CIO affiliated union?
That is one thing that we're really grateful for, is the AFT affiliation with AFL-CIO, because I do think it opens up possibilities that wouldn't exist if we were just on our own. Here locally, our local Labor Council President, Virginia Diamond, and the state level, the Virginia AFL-CIO President, Doris Kraus-Maids, they're definitely being very helpful for us. They are putting out volunteers. They're getting folks that are going to come help knock doors. They're going to help phone bank. They're sending us people. They are providing us space to work in. They're giving us some of those things. So I think having those resources have been very valuable. And I do think it also helps that both the AFT and NEA are located fairly close to Fairfax County. Obviously we're a suburb of Washington, D.C. And so I know that both national unions next week, when the primary voting period is going on, they're going to have lots of folks that are going to be out here helping us. They're going to be staffing schools. They're going to be, answering any questions that folks have. And so I definitely think it's been very valuable having our local affiliate staff, having our local affiliate members, but I think we've definitely seen the benefit of the national union in something of this scale, because I think you've already hit on this before, but this is one of the largest campaigns that we've seen in decades. So it's been intimidating, and having the resources to be able to make it happen has made it happen. So.
Yeah, and I want to make sure we mention SEIU and the local firefighters in Fairfax County, David Broder and Robert Young. They have supported us. They've spoken to us to make sure that we were on track, just asking, what it is that they can do to support and help us. So I just want to make sure that they're mentioned as well.
That's great. And I love, super excited to hear all of this support and solidarity from all of the different unions. You know, like I said, just between the AFT and the NEA, you can have problems potentially, and so then you add in all the other unions, and then you have all these other opportunities for conflict. And so it's great to see when folks can set everything aside and come together for for the greater good. Because a 27,000 person election. When was the last time that there was an election that was bigger than that? I have no idea. That's enormous.
We've tried to find out. It's been important. We have, David and I, we were just talking about this. And David, if I'm correct, it has been more than 40 years. Am I correct?
Yeah, like we haven't found any that have happened and within decades. So we know that this is, if it's not the largest, it's definitely one of the largest in probably the last half century. So
right. And so Leslie, given that we've talked about the support from the broader community of organized labor, what about politically? What has been the reaction from local and state level politicians in Virginia to this campaign?
Well, let's start with the state level. We have FEA, we have gotten nothing but support from the state level. They are pushing for us. They are very excited that we are working with FCFT, and it's the same on the local side as well. We have three school board members that ended up in Richmond this past year. We helped to get them elected, and we're very proud of that. And they are our cheerleaders. They want this to happen for us, just as we want this to happen. And they have children in the school system. I mean, this is going to affect a lot of people. This is going to affect the community of Fairfax County. So we've gotten a lot of support from the state and the local governments. I can't speak on the Board of Supervisors, all of them. I can say that James Walkinshaw, there's been several that have been very supportive. And then there are some that, while they want it for us, I would assume their votes don't say the same.
David, do you have anything else to add to that as far as the reaction from the politicians?
I would definitely say that, especially our local politicians, we haven't heard anything negative about from them in terms of organizing. We know that we have one member of our Board of Supervisors that would rather this whole process goes away. But we think that most of our school board members, most of our Board of Supervisors at the county level, most of our local Fairfax delegation to the Virginia General Assembly, they're all on our side, whether they are vocal about it or whether they're not quite as vocal about it. One thing that I think our folks, especially the state legislators, understand is the way that the last General Assembly created their collective bargaining bill was not ideal, because what they did is they left it up to the localities to decide if they wanted to have collective bargaining or not. And so one of the things that I'm hoping that our legislators do go back to Richmond and do is realize we've had collective bargaining happen in a few different places. The world hasn't burned down. The schools haven't gotten worse. Like this, it's improving outcomes for students. So rather than leave it up to districts to say, well, maybe you can give your employees rights or maybe you can't give your employees rights, let's just give our employees the rights. And so that's one thing that I think we're really hoping to see, in the next year or two. So.
Well, we'll from your lips to God's ears. Adam, you mentioned that you were a former educator. Do you have anything else you want to ask him before we let him go?
Yeah, I guess my only question would be, do you have any moment from this campaign where you had a conversation with an educator and they really got it in terms of the power that this represents? Any moments like from the campaign that just really stand out, some conversations you've had or just moments of inspiration? And Leslie, I'll take you or David, either one. Who wants to go first?
I would say one of the big conversations that I had with people was right after our Board of Supervisors passed their budget. Because once the Board of Supervisors passed their budget, it was very clear that the schools were not going to get the money for the raise that Dr. Reed, our superintendent, had been so strongly pushing for, that we had so strongly been pushing for. And I had some folks that were coming up to me and going, what happened here? Why did this not go through? Why did this not go through? Why weren't the unions doing more? And we were able to say, we did everything that we could, but in order to be able to do more, we need collective bargaining. And I know that I saw a few light bulbs go on as we were talking about that, folks realizing, oh, that's why we need collective bargaining. That's what we need. That's what we're going for. So I would say, just very recently with our budget process, I saw a lot of light bulb moments.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
So for me, it was just this Wednesday with a couple of instructional assistants who finally understood what was about to happen to their lives when we won the elections. And one of them was like, well, so does that, we're still going to have to fight. Every year we have to fight. And I explained to her about things that were happening in Minnesota, that there were instructional assistants and support staff that ended up getting $20,000 more. And she just, you could see the tears in her eyes. Those are the moments that make me happy that I am a president of a union. Because there's some moments that you're like, really, God, is this what you're having me do? But those moments when you realize that woman in that moment realized that she's the sole breadwinner of her family. She has 3 children and she's going to be able to live on her own eventually. That's a big deal. And we have so many more people that are just like that. So those are the moments. I asked David last week, I said, well, this past week, I said, has it hit you yet? Because people keep calling and saying, do you realize the magnitude of this? Do you realize the magnitude of this? And we were talking and he was like, I'm not sure. Well, I'm telling you, it has not hit me yet. And maybe when we finally win and I see that these people understand exactly what they have gotten, it will hit me, but it hasn't hit me yet.
Leslie Houston, president of the Fairfax County Education Association. David Walrod, president of the Fairfax County Federation of Teachers. Thank you both so much for your time this morning and for your work on this campaign. It is hugely important. It's the big news. Everybody's talking about the big news. I can only assume they're talking about this. So Leslie, David, really appreciate your work and your time this morning. And we'll look forward to reporting on a victory next week.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for having us, and we are looking forward to being able to talk about the victory once this is all done as well. So
yes,
awesome. Right. Thanks, y'all. Take care.
Bye.
All right, folks. Really exciting story out of Virginia. So look forward to updating you on that. We're going to take a break really quick, and we are going to be right back to bring you Boss Watch and some more international news, this time out of Mexico. So stay tuned. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report.
In Alabama, more than 200,000 of our friends and neighbors are living without health care coverage. Often folks can't stay healthy enough to keep their jobs. We need to fix this. Let's close the health care coverage gap. To learn more, visit coveralabama.org.
Support for this program also comes from the Iron Workers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Iron Workers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs, from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. Report. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Iron Workers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
The Laborers International Union of North America, Local 366, is proudly recruiting North Alabama workers to work construction and nuclear plant maintenance. If you're interested, please contact Donna at their training center to start the process. That phone number is 256-415-7452. Again, that phone number is 256-415-7452. No experience is needed. Free training is offered, but you must be able to pass a background check and a drug test. Local hiring that grows our community with good-paying jobs that have benefits is their mission. Live better, work union, Local 366, feel the power.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
I'm Attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, you need a lawyer who's with you.
Sinyard Law.
You need attorneys always available to take care of you.
Sinyard Law.
And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Sinyard Law.
And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case.
Sinyard Law.
A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Sinyard Law. The name with proven results.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Alabama's only union talk radio show. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host Adam Keller. Our phone number is 844-899-8857. That is 844-899-TVLR. If you'd like to call in, you can do so at the top of the hour, 11 o'clock. That's when we're going to be going off the radio, going into the second half of the program. So you can go ahead and get that phone number ready, and we will take calls at the beginning of the second half of the program if you want to call in. We have a new advertiser that I've forgotten to record the ad for. So I'm going to let y'all know about it now, and then we're going to record it after the show, and it'll be in the rotation next week. And that advertiser is the National Association of Letter Carriers, who since 1889 has protected the rights of city carriers as they deliver the mail and offer support for their community. The Alabama State Association of Letter Carriers makes their legislative voices heard when it comes to issues involving the U.S. Postal Service and the working members of their union. The National Association of Letter Carriers has been longtime supporters of MDA and the Stamp Out Hunger Food Drive, which just concluded a couple of weeks ago and collected tens of thousands of pounds of food for needy families just in Huntsville. Just in Huntsville and the surrounding communities, they collected tens of thousands of pounds of food for needy families. That's the National Association of Letter Carriers. Longtime sponsors of the Stamp Out Hunger Food Drive. Really good work that they do here in Huntsville and across the country. This message is sponsored by the Alabama Association of Letter Carriers. To visit more, you can go to NALC.org. That's NALC.org.
Adam, we've got there's an event happening on Wednesday that we're gonna kind of be a part of. Talk to us about it. What's going on Wednesday?
Yeah. Wednesday, June 5th. Mark your calendars. Definitely come out that evening if you're in North Alabama, Tennessee Valley area. It's going to be Wednesday, June 5th at St. Stephen's Music Hall, which is a new venue in Huntsville. It's at Campus 805. That's 2620 Clinton Avenue West. Most of you familiar with Campus 805, I'm sure, because of the breweries and various restaurants and other places you can check out there. So St. Stephen's is there at Campus 805. It's a new venue, and it is going to be hosting a film screening on Wednesday, June 5th. The title of the film is Open Country, and this event is really being spearheaded by the North Alabama School for Organizers. Shout out to Hy Thurman, who reached out to us about this. So Open Country is a film by Glenda Drew and Jesse Drew, and it's all about the history of country music, and there's a lot of labor connections with early history of country music. And so he thought, why not reach out to the local labor folks, and thought about us. So we really appreciate it. So the event is free. There's going to be live music happening both before and after the film screening. So a good chance to just go hang out. I believe there will be a cash bar there if you're so inclined, but it's free to attend the event. We will be accepting donations for the Valley Labor Report, so if you feel so inclined, you can certainly hook us up when you come by, and we'll also have our merch. We'll have stickers and hats and whatever other merch we happen to have available. So we'll be there. Come by and say hello. So Open Country is a journey into the roots of American country music, reclaiming it as the creative musical expression of working people of all colors. Through archival clips, contemporary interviews, performances, and animated graphics, Open Country repositions country music into its rightful place as a people's music. Some of the musicians that you'll hear about include Pete Seeger, Hazel Dickens, Billy Bragg, and lots more. So again, that's Wednesday, June 5th. Live music starts at 6:30. The film starts at 7, followed by a little bit of Q&A and more music. So great time to just have some fellowship and camaraderie, learn a little bit about music, hear some great music, and hopefully raise a little bit of dough for the Valley Labor Report. We'll appreciate anything that comes our way, for sure. This is a grassroots media project. So those of you who are newer listeners, you may not realize that we air on multiple radio stations, including WZZA and WVNN in North Alabama, both of which we have to pay for. We do pay to air on these radio stations, and so that's why we sell advertising, and it's why we ask for individual donations. It does cost a good bit of money to keep this program running, and to do all the stuff that we do, not just on the radio, but also online with the amazing graphics that you see and video editing. Thanks to Joe and Spencer and Ben and everybody else who works behind the scenes to help make this project a reality. So if you're able to contribute, you can. If you're able to come by Wednesday, June 5th in Huntsville, St. Stephen's Music Hall, check out the film screening, hear some good music, chip in a few bucks if you can. And if you can't make the event, that's all good. You can still share information about it. You can go to our Facebook page, you can share the post or the event, and you're also, of course, always able to donate at tvlr.fm/donate.
Appreciate everybody tuning in. We've got some 30 people watching the program and 30 likes, so appreciate that. If you haven't liked the program yet, liked the stream yet, then please go ahead and do so. Also, subscribe to the YouTube channel or wherever you're finding this. Subscribe to the program if you haven't. Got folks contributing in the chat. Appreciate that. Onion Canyon Farm, Anthony, Ronan, Leanne, DL Cindero, Jay Digger, Penelope, Jada, Dr. Mad, and Larry. Thank you all for tuning in, hanging out with us in the chat. Jared, the president of the Scientists and Engineers Union at the NASA Marshall Space Flight Center, said that any Marshall Space Flight Center employee that's listening to this program should come to the IBEW Hall on Clinton today. That's June the 1st, Saturday, June the 1st. If you're listening to me right now on YouTube or on Facebook or in WVN or, through WVNN, and you work at MSFC, Marshall Space Flight Center, head to the IBEW Hall on Clinton today from 12 to 4, where the Union for the Scientists and Engineers is going to be giving an information session on the tentative agreement for their new collective bargaining agreement. So if you're a scientist and engineer at the Marshall Space Flight Center, this contract is going to be governing your working conditions, right? Whether you're part of the union or not, this contract is going to have an impact on your working conditions. So whether you're a member of the union or not, you should go by the IBEW Hall, listen to the union's presentation, the information session, see what they have to say, and then you should join the union if you're not a part of the union.
Absolutely,
and participate and build the union, make it strong. But yeah, if you're a scientist or engineer at the Marshall Space Flight Center, head over to the IBEW Hall 12 to 4 to listen to the union's tentative agreement with the agency.
Yeah, and best of luck with that.
Yeah.
Good job on putting that together and doing that kind of outreach. It's really important to keep members engaged and informed. And as members, it's important that you take advantage of these opportunities, right? And because you're going to have questions and you're probably going to have gripes about this contract. I don't know how long it is, the duration of the agreement, but chances are you're going to have some questions, you're going to have some gripes. You're going to really wish you were at that information session if you miss it. So appreciate that.
Yep, absolutely. So let's check out what's going on in Mexico really quick. We've talked about what's going on in Mexico a few times, specifically as it relates to violations of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Trade Agreement, USMCA. That is the thing that replaced NAFTA. And there have been multiple violations of the USMCA by employers in Mexico. And one of the good things about the USMCA is that there has been increased enforcement of the trade agreement, particularly around labor regulations. And so, one of the reasons that manufacturers are going to Mexico is to exploit Mexican workers. And so both for the sake of Mexican workers, because one of the ideas about globalization is that, yes, while Mexican auto jobs are going to be worse than U.S. auto jobs, they're still going to get better. And actually, that's not been found to be true. Since globalization, since NAFTA, actually workers in Mexican auto plants make less than they did when NAFTA was passed. It's actually been worse for Mexican auto workers. And so these new labor enforcements in the USMCA are incredibly important, not so much because the government is going to make the conditions better, but because it will help the employees make the conditions better themselves. That's going to be the most consequential thing, is helping the Mexican workers stave off consequences for labor organizing, so that they're able to organize like American workers have and like European workers have, and get better working conditions. And so this is both of these stories out of Mexico surround that issue. The first one was the successful resolution of a rapid response labor mechanism matter at the Tizapa mine facility, known as Minera Tizapa in Zacazanapan in Mexico. And so the issue here was that the National Union of Mining, Metal, Steel, and Allied Workers of the Mexican Republic filed a petition alleging that Industrias Piñoles, SAB, violated workers' freedom of association and collective bargaining rights at the company's Minera Tizapa operations. Specifically, they said that the company dismissed union leaders and supporters for participating in union activity and withheld bonus payments to union supporters. Obviously, discriminatory behavior towards union supporters and union leaders. And behavior like that makes it more difficult to organize unions. If it's more difficult to organize unions, it's more difficult to improve wages and working conditions. So we want to stop that. We want to make sure that workers in Mexico have the freedom and liberty to organize, and that's what this case did. So in response to that finding that happened, there was a denial of workers' rights that occurred. The U.S. government requested the Mexican government conduct a review of the petition, and the review resulted in an agreement between the Mexican government and the operators, in which they took several steps to remediate the concerns, including the following. They reinstated 11 workers for being dismissed for allegedly engaging in protected union activity, with more than $60,000 in back wages in total for 7 of those workers. They also paid $140,000 in bonuses denied previously to 249 workers affiliated with the union. They paid dues to the union that the employer failed to collect as per their agreement. They also issued an employer neutrality statement and provided guidelines on freedom of association and collective bargaining, and they trained workers and managers on freedom of association rights and company guidelines. So this is a huge deal, really important, especially for these workers involved. $60,000 US dollars, that's in I don't know what that is in pesos, yeah. in pesos, but that's, $60,000 between 7 workers is a lot for American workers, right? It's going to be huge, life-changing amounts of money for those workers in Mexico. And that $140,000 between 249 workers that in bonuses that were illegally denied, really important, and that's going to be really good for the union as they try to organize. They're now going to be able to say, look, we got people hired back, we got people back pay. Join the union. We're gonna make things better. We're gonna, and so yeah, really really exciting news. And in this press release from the Department of Labor, that one of the things said by Ambassador Catherine Tai said the Biden-Harris administration is committed to standing up for workers denied their right to freedom of association and collective bargaining. And to date, the rapid response mechanism has benefited nearly 30,000 workers. 30,000 workers. So really exciting story there out of Zacatzapan in Mexico at a mine facility. This other one is dealing with Volkswagen in Mexico at their assembly plant in Puebla. Here again, we saw the request that followed a petition filed by 10 workers who were fired by Volkswagen Mexico, who allege that their freedom of association and collective bargaining rights at the plant were violated. That they're alleging that they were fired because of their union affiliation. Well, under this rapid response labor mechanism, the petition asserts that is what happened. That 10 members of the outgoing leadership committee of the Independent Union of Workers of the Automotive, Similar, and Related Industries, those 10 workers affiliated with that union were fired after a union election. And so we've got here, American officials saying that they're concerned about this, And so today's action reflects the United States' unwavering commitment to ensuring that workers can engage in union activity without fearing reprisals. So the Mexico's government has 10 days to decide whether to conduct a review and 45 days to investigate the claims and present its findings. So this one, the other one, the one at the mine facility, was a resolved case, right? They got these people their jobs back, they got back pay. And this story from Volkswagen, we are seeing at the beginning, right? So this is just at the beginning. These 10 workers were just fired, and so the United States government has been alerted to this, and they're saying, hey, look, Mexico, hey, let's do something about this. This is not okay. We got to fix it. So we'll keep an eye on this and see what happens. The Volkswagen plant in Mexico in Puebla employs about 6,100 assembly line workers, 5,000 supervisory or trusted employees, and thousands of parts assembly workers. The facility manufactures 2,300 vehicles per day. That is, I don't know how that compares to other. I don't know if that's a lot. That sounds like a lot.
Sounds like a lot.
That sounds like a lot of vehicles. 2,300 per day. In 2023, the company exported more than 300,000 vehicles from that plant, including 67% for sale in the United States. So we'll keep an eye on that, and hopefully we'll have another positive story here in the next month or two out of Volkswagen in Mexico. With that, let's get to the final segment of the program. We'll get to Boss Watch, where we take a look at, last week in Southern Labor, we take a look at what workers are up to in the South. Boss Watch, we take a look at what bosses are up to in the South. And folks, the spoiler is that it's bad. Bosses are up to bad things. In West Virginia, an investigation and litigation by the U.S. Department of Labor recovered $175,000 in back wages from a Charleston coal mining company that laid off 44 Matewan miners and denied them a final paycheck while filing for bankruptcy. The department's Wage and Hour Division learned Benz Creek Operations West Virginia LLC informed the affected workers of the layoff on April 9th, and then filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy immediately after that. They filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy 5 days later, and then failed to issue the miners their last paycheck, as is required for the 2 weeks of work performed between March 31st and April 13th. During that time period, the division determined that the mine had produced about 40,000 tons. 40,000 tons, not 40,000 pounds, 40,000 tons of metallurgical coal worth more than $3 million. Payroll before profits is one of the key principles in the Fair Labor Standards Act. A bankruptcy filing does not excuse an employer's obligation to pay workers for all the hours that they worked or allow them to violate federal law, said Wage and Hour Division Director John Dumont in Pittsburgh. The Wage and Hour Division is committed to ensuring workers receive the highest protections to which they are entitled. So, on May the 2nd, 2024, the Department's Office of the Solicitor obtained a temporary restraining order in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of West Virginia to stop Benz Creek Operations West Virginia from selling or moving the coal mined in its final 2 weeks of operation until they paid the back wages owed. Federal law prevents interstate shipments of goods produced in violation of the minimum wage, overtime, or child labor regulations, and applies to the employer and all those in possession of the goods. The court issued a final order on May the 10th that required the employer to pay all outstanding back wages, and then they did. So that's a really great story. $175,000 in back wages for 44 West Virginia miners. In Alabama, the U.S. Department of Labor filed a complaint on May the 30th asking a federal court to prevent 3 Alabama companies, including a Hyundai U.S. assembly and manufacturing plant, from employing children illegally. The complaint also requests that the court require the 3 companies to surrender profits related to the use of oppressive child labor. The action follows an investigation by the department's Wage and Hour Division that found that a 13-year-old worked up to 50 to 60 hours per week. 50 to 60 hours a week for a 13-year-old on an assembly line in Laverne, Alabama, operating machines that formed sheet metal into auto body parts. In the complaint filed in federal court, the department named 3 companies as defendants: Hyundai Motor Manufacturing Alabama, Smart Alabama, and Best Practice Service. Best Practice Service sent the child to Smart Alabama, which provided component parts to Hyundai Motor Manufacturing Alabama. In the complaint, the department alleged that all 3 companies jointly employed the child. The department went on to allege that between July 11th, 2021 and through February 1st, 2022, the companies willfully and repeatedly
violated the child labor provisions of the Fair Labor Standards Act, and the complaint further alleges that the companies violated the hot goods provision of the Fair Labor Standards Act. The department's Office of the Solicitor filed the complaint in the U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Alabama in Montgomery and seeks an order to stop the illegal employment of children. The complaint also requests an order requiring the companies to disgorge profits related to the use of child labor. Hyundai Motor Manufacturing Alabama operates a manufacturing facility in Montgomery. At the time of the events at issue, Smart Alabama manufactured component parts at a facility in Laverne, and Best Practice was a staff agency. That's why they all three jointly employed this child. In fiscal year 2023, the department investigated almost 1,000 cases with child labor violations, involving almost 6,000 children nationwide, including over 500 children employed in violation of hazardous occupation standards. The department addressed those violations by assessing employers over $8 million in civil money penalties. Wrapping up with a nationwide update on the Mine Safety and Health Administration, the U.S. Department of Labor announced that it had completed impact inspections at 15 mines in 11 states in April 2024, issuing 247 violations and 2 safeguards. An inspector issued safeguards due to site-specific standards at underground coal mines to address safety hazards related to transportation of miners and materials in haulage ways. The agency conducts these impact inspections at mines that merit increased agency attention and enforcement due to poor compliance history, previous accidents, injuries and illnesses, and other compliance concerns. In April, MSHA inspectors completed inspections at mines in Arkansas, Florida, Kentucky, and Virginia and West Virginia, among other states. Of the 247 violations identified, the agency evaluated 67 were significant and substantial. The Foreman Quarry and plant operated by Ash Grove Cement Company 1 in Little River County, Arkansas, was among the mines selected for an impact inspection in April. MSHA chose the cement mine for an impact inspection due in part to a recent accident and an unplanned explosion in the alternative fuel storage area. Inspectors arrived at the mine on the morning of April 22nd and headed directly to predetermined areas of concern based on prior inspection history. The inspection resulted in a total of 50 citations at one company, 14 of which were designated as significant and substantial, including large rocks and debris being observed on the edge of the feed hopper for the reclaim belt. Miners were working in the area with no barricades or signage posted, exposing them to falling material hazards and potential crushing injuries. Another one was the non-functioning reverse-activated back alarms leading to violations. Other hazardous conditions found at the mine included mobile equipment defects, parking procedures not being followed, equipment guarding not being maintained, accumulation of combustible materials, improper chemical labeling, failing to maintain firefighting equipment, and multiple compressed air violations. Not good. Not good. We have a few dishonorable mentions, but we don't have time to get to them. So if you want to see those dishonorable mentions, you're going to need to subscribe to our newsletter. You can do that at tvlr.fm/contact. Adam, what are our plugs for the to wrap up the show with?
Sure. As they do each month, our friends at Labor Notes are hosting a series of online trainings. Go to labornotes.org/events. Highly recommend you check it out. They have a race and labor workshop series that's coming up in June that's worth checking out. Don't forget about our fundraiser on Wednesday, June 5th in Huntsville at St. Stephen's Music Hall. Come on out that evening for live music and a film screening. Also, I will be on America's Workforce Radio on Wednesday, June 5th. Southern Workers Assembly has their Southern Worker School. Oh, they just had their Southern Worker School this past week, so I hope that went well. On June 10th, I will be partnering with Jennifer Shearer once again with the Economic Policy Institute to do a Unions 101 webinar. It's hosted by the League of Women Voters of Alabama, so you can go to their page and find out more. Again, that's June 10th, that evening, free webinar, Unions 101, spread the word. And I think that was about all I had. I just want to encourage folks to stay engaged, keep following our stuff on social media. Your likes and shares really do make a difference. If you haven't subscribed or given us a review yet on your app of choice, definitely do that. That helps as well.
All right, folks, that's going to be it for us on the first half of the program. We got a whole second half of the program left to go. We got another hour and a half that's going to be online. If you're listening to us on the radio, you can find us on Facebook or YouTube to catch the second half of the program, where we are going to be talking to Brandon Magner, who is a labor attorney for the National Labor Relations Board, about his recent scholarly article about the Wagner Act. Brandon Magner is a Wagner Act defender.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Cool.
So he's a big fan of the Wagner Act, the National Labor Relations Act. We're going to be talking to him about that. We're also going to be talking to John Melrod, author of Fighting Times, organizing on the front lines of the class war. It's a really good book about his time in the United Auto Workers Local 72 and 75. He was also part of a Steel Workers Local, talking about contract campaigns, getting people their jobs back, fighting the boss, all that kind of stuff. So really looking forward to that conversation. We got some more stuff. We're also going to be taking your calls, 844-899-TVLR, 844-899-8857. With that, see you in the second half of the show, or if you don't follow us, we will see you next week. All right, that is it for us. We're off the radio now. Appreciate everybody staying tuned. Like I said, really great second half of the program lined up for you. 844-899-TVLR is the phone number, 844-899-8857. And we'll take your calls at the beginning of the show, at the beginning of the second half of the show. Right now we're going to take a break, and we will be right back.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
welcome back. You are still listening to the Valley Labor Report, Alabama's only union talk radio program, and potentially the only union radio program in Kentucky and Louisiana. Maybe. I don't know. But we're on the radio in Kentucky and Louisiana, that's for sure. The biggest union talk radio program in the South. Comfortable saying that. If there's a bigger one, let me know. I'm aware of other union radio programs in the South, but they're not as big as we are.
That's true.
So,
yeah.
There you go.
Leading. We are the leading
that's
program.
Right. That's right. The leading. That's actually how we were quoted in the Alabama Political Reporter by Chance Phillips.
Oh, well, now that we've seen it in the news, it must be true.
That's right. The leading union talk radio program.
The mainstream, the lamestream media wouldn't lie about us.
That's right. And now we're in the second half of the program that used to be online only, but now we are on the radio in Kentucky. Kentucky, the only state in the union to hear on the radio the whole program on the radio. Everybody can hear it everywhere online, but Kentucky is hearing the second half of the program on the radio too, on WMMT. If you're in Kentucky, obviously you gotta be listening to WMMT. If you're in Whitesburg, you should support them and all that good stuff. We appreciate their support of us, and we support them. I think it's a pretty cool thing that you got going on over there.
Yeah, absolutely. Big fan of community radio stations, and if you have any connections at community radio stations, hit us up.
Especially if it's anywhere in the South. You know, WRFG in Atlanta, I want to target them to try to get on the radio there. Especially in the wake of that really exciting election of the DSA candidate to State House. That's in WRFG's territory. And apparently I was talking to some DSA folks from Atlanta. They say that WRFG is like a real, like people listen to it. So we'll have to, we're going to try to target them. We've got a good second half of the program for you. Brandon Magner is coming on here in about 10 minutes to talk about the Wagner Act. We're also going to be talking to John Melrod. But first, we're going to be talking about child labor. You know, we just finished going through Boss Watch and talking about this issue with, you know, Hyundai and the child labor stuff. And the real big deal there, you know, is that that Hyundai is violating the hot goods provision of the child labor provision of the Fair Labor Standards Act. And basically the hot goods provision just, it says that, like, if you make stuff with child labor, you can't make money off of it. That's not you can't do it. You forfeit by utilizing child labor, you forfeit the right to the profits from said child labor. So the Department of Labor is alleging that did not happen, that Hyundai still sold goods that were made with not just child labor, but oppressive child labor is the language that the U.S. Department of Labor has used in their filings. And again, 50 to 60 hours for a 13-year-old. A 13-year-old working 50 to 60 hours in an auto shop, right? I mean, this is just, there's so many layers to this and so many reasons that it's wrong. And so the Department of Labor is saying, like, look, you did child labor, then you sold the stuff that you made with child labor and you got profits from it. You got to give them up. That's what the law says. You can't have that. You got to give up the profits. So that just happened, and this has been, a growing issue across the country. In the roundup of that press release, they talked about how in 2023 there were almost 1,000 cases with child labor violations, 955 cases of child labor violations, 5,792 children nationwide, including 502 children employed in violation of hazardous occupation standards. That's 500 kids that were in places like not only like working longer, which is already, working longer than you need to is a health hazard, like in and of itself, even if the job is safe. But these 500 kids were in violation of the hazardous occupation. They're working in like auto shops. Unsafe conditions is where these 500 children are working. And these are only the ones that the Department of Labor caught.
Right.
I mean, how many more
it's like an open secret that this stuff is going on at poultry plants across the country, at auto shops across the country, at restaurants across the country. It's going on everywhere, and it's going on more and more. And this is just the stuff that's being caught. And so we should do something about it. The government should do something about it. And there has been an attempt to do something about it in the Farm Bill. And Texas Representative Greg Casar was talking about this and how the amendment to the Farm Bill that would address some of the child labor issues that we've been seeing across the country, that amendment has been voted down in the House of Representatives. Let's listen to Representative Greg Casar make this point in the House last week.
The big meat packers have been fighting this bill from the start. We filed it months ago. There's a companion in the Senate. We've been narrowing it down. The reason that there's amendments and amendments to amendments is that the meat packers have known they have consolidated across the industry. They've gotten bigger and bigger. And with that size, they've thrown their political weight around. They've driven up prices for consumers by reducing free market competition. They've broken the law at their plants. The law has been broken at their plants. And folks say, well, where are we going to get our meat? Because there's so few options. What if we enforce child labor law against them? Who will we get our meat from? Because they've gotten so big. And they've driven down revenue for farmers and ranchers. Whether you're in a Democratic district or a Republican district, I know when you go talk with small ranchers, folks have seen their revenue drop as the big meat packers have consolidated their economic and political power. So in this Farm Bill, working families are taking a hit, a cut or a reduction to the nutrition programs that feed them. Farm workers are taking a hit, but the protections are for the meat packers. Instead of us enforcing child labor laws or the minimum wage, they get a multi-million-dollar contract. And the vote that just happened on party line was, we'll study it. So the meat packers get a study with their multi-million-dollar contracts. Workers will continue to be exploited. We see that in other sections of this bill. Liability shields for chemical companies that otherwise would be sued for having cancerous pesticides. So the chemical companies get a liability shield, the meat packers get a study, working families, they get a cut to the SNAP benefits that they otherwise could receive. And in my view, that's why this isn't just a partisan farm bill. It's a farm bill that ultimately serves the interests of those folks that have lobbyists at the expense of the everyday constituents. And with that, I yield back.
So there you go. I mean, and just to reiterate and to emphasize, what his amendment would have done is it would have said that the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the federal government, will not contract with meatpacking facilities that engage in, quote, serious, repeated, or pervasive use of illegal child labor. Right? And that is just eminently reasonable. And the idea that that is not, that's not a standard provision in the Farm Bill should be a cause of shame among our elected representatives. The idea that a meatpacking facility with serious, repeated, or pervasive illegal child labor can get a contract with the USDA is absurd. I mean, even that language, that's like, you can still do a little illegal child labor and we'll contract with you, right? I mean, this is such a mild thing. It's not even saying if you do illegal child labor once, you're done. It's saying you can do a little bit of child labor, but you can't be doing it all the time, and you can't be repeating doing it. I mean, this is so reasonable and moderate. And, I mean, Republicans voted it down. That's who voted this amendment down. Right? It was a party line vote, and look, we can criticize Democrats, we can criticize the Republicans, but we should know what's going on. We should know what's going on, and the Republicans killed this amendment to the Farm Bill, and so the Republicans voted affirmatively to allow the USDA to contract with meatpacking facilities that engage in serious, repeated, and pervasive illegal child labor. That's the position of the Republican Party. And I mean, it's just like, it's so bizarre. It's so bizarre. I do not understand how how people can support this. And like Kassar said, this is also the bill that is going to be cutting SNAP benefits. And so it's going to be taking away benefits for poor and working people. And it is going to be continuing to give protections to huge consolidated meatpacking conglomerates.
Right.
Absolutely bonkers.
Yeah, there's so much there, right? Because there's the lack of worker protections and the attacks on worker protections. There's the growing monopoly power of this industry, and then there's benefit cuts on top of that. Basically, the cuts that they're talking about making to SNAP, to what is commonly called food stamps, amounts to about 1 to 2 days a month worth of benefits. It'll start at about 1 day a month, and by the end of this 10-year projection, be about 2 days worth of benefits a month that will be cut. Maybe some folks don't think that's a big deal, but I do think it's a big deal if you're telling hungry folks that, here's 1 or 2 days less a month that you're going to have benefits to provide for yourself or your family. I mean, this is children we're talking about, the elderly, disabled folks. And SNAP also, frankly, is an economic stimulus. Like most social safety net programs, it's a stimulus to the economy. It's a stimulus for farmers, right, who produce the food. And so it's a multi-layered effect. It affects the economy, and it really just stings, right? The poorest and most marginalized folks. And so it's really shameful to see folks in D.C. that are supposed to represent constituents, and they don't. They represent corporate forces. And it's really, really disheartening when you see legislation like this where it could have actually helped people. Could have actually made a little bit of a positive impact, but couldn't get it across the finish line with the current makeup.
Right. We're going to go ahead and transition to our conversation with Brandon Magner, the Wagner Act defender. Brandon's on the line now. Brandon is a labor attorney with the National Labor Relations Board, also a member of the National Labor Relations Board Union, speaking in his personal capacity about a scholarly article that he wrote about the National Labor Relations Act and its effect on organizing. Brandon, welcome back to the program. Appreciate your time.
Hey, Jake. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Really excited about this. And, this has been something that I've been trying to work my way through for the last couple of years. It's been in, been in the zeitgeist among, union folks, particularly like, left labor people, the debate about the efficacy of the National Labor Relations Act. And so you have some people on one far end that say that, really labor law reform is kind of the only way that workers are going to be able to organize, and the National Labor Relations Act is the reason that workers organized in the 20th century, and the reason why we don't have a labor upsurge right now is because we haven't passed the PRO Act and we don't have good labor laws, and that's what we need, and that's the whole thing, is we got to have different laws. And then you've got people on the other side that basically say the opposite thing, that say that the National Labor Relations Act actually was bad for organizing, and it hampered growth, but for the National Labor Relations Act, we would have had even more unions in the United States. And so we spoke to last weekend or maybe 2 weekends ago, Professor Michael Goldfield, who's kind of in the center of that. He's not. I don't think he would say that the National Labor Relations Act was bad, but his position is kind of like, it was. Didn't really have that big of an effect. And you're not all the way on the end that says like the law is totally totally responsible, but I think your position is that it had a positive effect, a measurable, quantifiable positive effect. And so I guess the first thing is to could you explain to us what made you want to wade into this debate in like a scholarly kind of peer-reviewed type forum as opposed to something maybe less formal, doing Twitter threads or like an article in a pop magazine or something like that. What made you want to write this article?
Sure. Thanks, Jake. I just want to reiterate my disclaimer. I appreciate you already providing it, but nothing, my opinions do not reflect on the National Labor Relations Board, its general counsel, its board members, blah, 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 federal government in general. Speaking in my personal capacity. But I guess what motivated me to write it, and I think you framed the issue pretty well, is I don't want to. Another disclaimer is I don't want to sound like I'm saying that I don't necessarily subscribe to that first camp you described of that the law is all that's necessary. If we just tweak the law in some fashion here soon, that we're suddenly going to see a labor uprising and it's going to be the 1930s again. I think that's at all accurate. But I guess what motivated me to write it is there has been that kind of resurgence in early circles of arguing, I guess, maybe more the other end you described of not only did the Wagner Act not have a great effect in the 1930s or 1940s organizing, it has overall had a net negative effect. And I think it's important that we reframe that at the beginning to note that the Wagner Act was only in effect from 1935 to 1947. What we see today, what today's regime of labor law is the Taft-Hartley amendments and the Landrum-Griffin amendments that were passed in the 40s and 50s to really restrict what the law was seen as favoring unions single-handedly. And I don't think that's necessarily an inaccurate description, considering that the original law only had unfair labor practices for employers. It did not contain unfair labor practices for unions. No union activity was specifically circumscribed by the law. But those amendments were made to make organizing more difficult and to try and reposition the federal government from being on the side of collective action of workers into being more of a neutral referee in terms of collective bargaining and organizing. And I'm not here to defend necessarily those amendments or today's scheme of labor law. It's more of, and the reason I wrote the article was I hadn't seen anybody articulate a defense for the Wagner Act's passing, for its, for the reason why it was set up the way it was in the 1930s. I hadn't seen anybody really articulate that in a long time. I think it was, early in the middle of the 20th century, I think most people would have agreed with that point that, when unions were still plentiful and strong, that the labor law that had been set up, even after its amendments, was still a net positive for the labor movement and workers' rights in general. But obviously, as unions have, been really restricted in what they can do, and as union density has fallen greatly over the last few decades, you've seen a understandable level of skepticism. And so I wrote it just to kind of respond to some of those recent impulses and shifts in scholarship, and just to kind of reiterate, I don't think there's no groundbreaking arguments that I make that I don't think have been at least implicitly argued elsewhere. I just wanted to kind of frame it in one coherent article where if somebody wanted to go read that point of view, they could go and see that argument made and then make their decision.
And so if you could restate the arguments of the people that put forward the argument that I personally find the least sympathetic, which is that, there are people that say the National Labor Relations Act, it was actually bad. It was bad. It hurt the labor movement. It would have been even better if we hadn't we just hadn't passed any laws. How do they support that argument? What do they say?
Sure. So there's basically two parts to it. You first have to believe that the Wagner Act, as passed, had really no effect on the great successes that we saw in the 1930s and 1940s. And then you have to believe that what followed after, which it's hard to decouple the Taft-Hartley amendments from that, but you have to believe that the system that was set up under the Wagner Act was a net negative for kind of revitalizing the labor movement. As we're seeing the labor movement now, it's unable to, despite some big headlines and successes, you're not seeing like the overwhelming strike activity or organizing activity that we saw 80 years ago. So I think you have to believe that, and they would argue that not totally unconvincingly, that for example, the sit-down strikes at General Motors, that occurred before the Wagner Act was really operational, because employers did not respect or even pay any mind to the Wagner Act until 1937, when it was deemed constitutional by the Supreme Court. So that's a good point to make, that they make, is that the sit-down strike happened at General Motors without the federal government coming in and organizing an election first, or declaring unfair labor practices. That was they got that initial contract at General Motors prior to that, and then they would point to U.S. Steel. They achieved voluntary recognition from U.S. Steel right after the sit-down strikes without an election or a trial or anything run by the NLRB. So from that point, they then kind of leapfrog to everything that followed after was really inevitable. I think the NLRB, the NLRA was just kind of there. The general position had already been established, and it was it was a snowball rolling downhill, basically, of worker militancy. And I don't think I need to go too in depth into the arguments about why it would have net negative effects today. Honestly, I'm not sure I disagree with the way labor law is set up now under the Taft-Hartley regime, that hurts workers' rights and and unions' ability to kind of muster the militancy that it sometimes needs on the picket lines, and to get contracts and organize. There's a lot of things under the Taft-Hartley Act that make it very difficult to do the things that the legal regime blessed as lawful in the 1930s and 1940s, whether that's closed shops, secondary picketing, recognitional picketing. Those were all lawful under the Wagner Act. So, and sorry, didn't mean to ramble there, but basically it's the argument that worker militancy won those gains in the 30s and 40s, not government bureaucrats. And everything that followed after was funneling the labor movement into a legalistic, bureaucratic regime of, instead of you going out on the picket line and getting your contract, it was, banding together with your brothers and sisters on the picket line. It was, having a lawyer file a brief on your behalf, making a legal argument of why your rights should be respected. And I'm really, I think, dumbing that down, but I think that is the general sentiment of that argument.
I think that's a good summary. I think that's basically how I understand it. And so then, and like you said, I think both of us agree that there are some points of that argument that are, that have some degree of relevancy, and that have some degree of truth value to them. And so then how do you respond to those articles or to those arguments and make the case that I guess what you have to do is make the case that yes, under the Taft-Hartley regime, potentially it is the case that the system of labor regulations in the United States is a net negative, but the Wagner Act itself was good, and it was not. The Wagner Act did not necessitate Taft-Hartley, right? Because that's really key to their argument, right? Is that because of the Wagner Act, therefore Taft-Hartley, and everyone agrees Taft-Hartley is bad. So if we don't have the Wagner Act, then we don't have, and so how do you argue that the Wagner Act did not necessitate Taft-Hartley, that we could have had something better, and so the Wagner Act itself was good, and it should have been passed, and even if we knew everything that we know now, if we knew all of that, we still should have passed the Wagner Act?
Sure. I guess to the lowest picking fruit there is an argument that Taft-Hartley couldn't have happened without Wagner Act. I think U.S. history is pretty definitive on you didn't need good laws passed to pass anti-union laws on the back end. I think U.S. history prior to the Wagner Act was decades and decades of passing, anti-union laws, or laws maybe if not explicitly anti-union, that harmed worker organizing. And that is what the Wagner Act changed for the first time. It was a definitive, explicit endorsement of workers' collective activity and rights by the federal government, positioning the federal government as an encourager of that activity. That had never happened before. You could argue the North LaGuardia Act, banning yellow dog contracts and injunctions issued by federal courts against workers. And that was certainly a good antecedent for the Wagner Act, but it was not the same fulsome endorsement of collective bargaining, prohibitions on firing union organizers. Things like that. The Wagner Act was a massive sea change in that effect. So my response to the argument that the Wagner Act wasn't necessary is if you take a very simplistic view of the Wagner Act can only be represented by the NLRB coming into town and running an election or having a trial and issuing condemnations of unfair labor practices, then sure, the NLRB and the Wagner Act play no explicit role in, for example, the sit-down strikes, or in 1936 and early 1937, or U.S. Steel, Chrysler, the other big wins of that time. But what the Wagner Act did and what it represented was, like I said, it was not only a symbolic but an explicit declaration by the federal government that worker organizing is basically a legitimate and frankly good activity. That sent a signal to New Deal governors, New Deal aligned governors, and state officials to not only go and pass their own state laws that were in effect for several years during this time in the 1930s and early 1940s that also encouraged worker organizing, but it basically, when, for example, the sit-down strike at General Motors, it's been mentioned, it's sometimes mentioned in passing that, Frank Murphy, the governor, was, didn't come down and didn't issue out the national, or didn't call out the National Guard on the workers. But that probably only happened in the way it did is because FDR won by a landslide in 1936. Murphy won the governorship the same year, and he owed a lot of it to labor unions in his state of Michigan. And the strike, I think all agree the strike would have been lost if he called in the National Guard and told them, under the property rights of General Motors, they have rights to that factory, and so we need to kick them out of the facility. That would have been the 50 years, 70, 80 years prior, that would have been exactly how that strike was handled. But because he could point to the Wagner Act and he could say General Motors was guilty of flagrant unfair labor practices, whether the NLRB had run a trial yet or not, it was obvious that they weren't respecting the workers' rights to organize and their calls for collective bargaining. It provided this kind of moral impetus, this moral symbol that governors in other states, were able to seize on and say that, this is a regime that we need to respect. The other example would be whether the NLRB was technically operational or not at the time. The La Follette Commission the committee was at that time investigating for the first time, the U.S. Senate was doing deep dives and investigations into employers' crackdown against union organizing, revealing things like massive spy networks that all these companies were paying for, their arms that they were hoarding, to arm their local militias and private militaries and police forces that were on their payroll. The NLRB's employees at the time, while they were waiting for the act either to be declared constitutional or not by the Supreme Court, were basically spending their time investigating and aiding that committee in revealing those regimes, those unlawful regimes, and really embarrassing the heads of those corporations in ways that they had never been embarrassed before by the federal government, and arguably changing their behavior and eliminating their prior methods of combating unions. It's whether it was, for example, during the sit-down strike, they knew of some of the stooges in the union because it was discovered by the committee's investigation. So I'm not saying that then they only won the sit-down strike because of that, but it empowered them in ways and aided them in ways that the federal government had never done before.
Right. And so I guess it would be difficult probably to come to an ultimate resolution on, was it, I guess one of the things that they would say that for instance, Goldfield, I don't know how much your article deals with any of Goldfield's arguments, but in his book, The Southern Key, he references the campaign to organize the coal miners in the South and how that John Lewis and the UMWA, all of them, even as the campaign is going on, are crediting Section 7A of the National Industrial Relations Act, which had even less force than the National Labor Relations Act, because the NIRA, there was no enforcement at all. At least with the NLRA, there was some enforcement. There was some, kind of an investigatory capabilities. But Section 7 of the NIRA just said, you have the right to unionize, basically. And so John Lewis is going out and he's making this argument that the government said that it's okay to unionize, and that really excited the miners, and that's what helped us unionize the coal mining industry. But Goldfield points to minutes from local union meetings, reports to the International, showing that they were organizing, like a lot of these locals that John Lewis attributes the organization of to Section 7 of the NIRA. A lot of those locals were actually organized before the NIRA passed. And so therefore he kind of asserts that really didn't have anything to do with that. And so, how do you combat the idea that, even in the absence of the NLRA, the National Labor Relations Act, the Wagner Act, even in the absence of that, all of these things would have happened anyway, as far as, the workers would have been able to compel the government to do something. The workers would have been able to compel the management to give in. Frank Murphy was saying that about the NLRA and unfair labor practices because that was the easiest thing to pull down. But even in the absence of that, the workers, he still would have been afraid of the workers' militancy, and he still wouldn't have done anything. How do you get around the counterfactuals? Because it's really difficult to I don't know. Counterfactual analysis is really difficult, but how do you respond to that?
Sure. There's the specific issue. I'm glad you brought up the coal miners and Goldfield's argument, because I am familiar with it. There's that specific argument, and there's that broader argument you're talking about these counterfactuals of history. I'll just say first that I think the clearest counterfactual of history to before the Wagner Act is that industrial unions didn't exist, basically, and as we know them in the auto sector, the steel sector, rubber, electronics, everything. So the clearest counterfactual, they have the harder argument of saying that the Wagner Act didn't matter because before the Wagner Act, there was no broad labor movement in the mass industry of the United States. So they first have to make the argument of the Wagner Act. So they have to, the easier argument is to say the Wagner Act had some effect on that, because after that, not only did unions organize, but the unions stuck around. They didn't disappear. They did.
That's a really important point. And if you don't mind, I'll interject just for the audience. Some people might not be familiar with this, but there was an enormous coal strike or steel strike in 1919. You said that unions came around and they stuck around, right? And that's I think the important point, because in 1919 there was a huge steel strike involving over 100,000 workers across the country. It was a national strike, and the unions were destroyed, and the unions didn't stay around. Even after the Wagner Act, even in the event of lost strikes, a lot of times unions still stuck around, whereas in 1919, when you lost a strike, you were destroyed. And they were destroyed in 1919. So that's a really good point about the counterfactual.
Right, because in 1919 and before, I mean, there were mass uprisings. I don't want to pretend that the Wagner Act created, and that's, to the point about the coal miners, the Wagner Act or the NIRA did not necessarily create the desire in workers to organize. I think that sometimes gets a little, I think some historians really bandy about that FDR quote about that president wants you to join a union and act like that suddenly everybody just discovered unions in that moment. That's not true. And the coal miners do prove that because, as Goldfield demonstrates, they were basically organized prior to the time of which you could really credit the NRA carrying out the NIRA as Section 7A of that act. I'll just point out, though, that coal miners were basically the exception to industrial workers having some history of organizing successfully. They had a lot of organizing success prior to 1932 and 1933. So they were one of the few industry professions that had massive leverage over the industry. And there's a lot of things we can point out. We can point out that compared to foremen having power over an auto factory, there is no equivalent of that in the coal mines in the early 1900s. So I mean, there's a lot of structural issues there that I think make the coal miners a poor comparison to what we saw in rubber, steel, and auto that made those places difficult to organize. But going back to what your interjection about 1919 steel strike and how that was a massive uprising, on par with or even surpassing the 1934-1935 organizing in many ways. And that disappeared almost overnight because there was no structure in place that prevented the companies from just bringing back the old playbook of fire the union organizers, litter their membership meetings with paid company spies, learn who the organizers are, fire them, make an example of them. That playbook worked for 100 years before the Wagner Act. The Wagner Act doesn't mean every strike won, every organizing activity won. It just meant that when you did win, you did have a union on the scale of something like a General Motors or Ford or U.S. Steel. You couldn't just evaporate that union overnight through sheer resources and anti-union activity. Effectively, what it means is if you have a bargaining unit of 100,000 or more people, that bargaining unit is not going away unless you shut down factories and do a lot of things that didn't really happen until the 1970s, 1980s through capital flight. And that's a different argument to make about labor law's inability to crack down on those types of activities by employers. But just the Wagner Act completely, in many ways, rewrote and defeated the old employer playbook of how to keep the mass industry sectors union free. And so the coal miners, I think the mere fact that coal miners were organized in the early 1930s without the aid of the federal government doesn't prove that, for example, when the deep recessions of the late 1930s hit, that those unions would, I think there's a strong argument to make that without the Wagner Act, even if the sit-down strike happens the exact same way without federal endorsement of worker organizing, that their organizations are either greatly hindered or disappear entirely in the late 1930s when those deep recessions hit again. And because historically that's what happened is, you would have this mass uprising for this burst of energy by workers, and then their organizations would not last outside of the small crafts that existed prior. And go ahead.
Yeah. And so, these conversations are had because, I think the participants in the conversations think that there's some relevancy for us today. There's something to be learned from whether or not the Wagner Act was good. So, what should we take away as union activists, as maybe non-union workers who want to unionize, or labor leaders? What should folks listening take away from the argument from the argument that you're putting forward, that the Wagner Act was good, and Taft-Hartley was bad, but it wasn't necessary because of by the Wagner Act. The Wagner Act was good. We need to understand that. What's the relevancy for us today? What should we do with that information?
Sure. And I'm not offering, I want to be clear, I'm not offering any playbook, and nor should I, in my capacity. I guess what I would take away from, at least if you do find my argument at all convincing in my article and are on generally my side of the argument, is that it's a mild one. It's not to say, oh, we need to pass this specific law to re-empower workers. It's not any one specific tweak in the labor code that's going to magically restart the 1930s. It's going to be something. If the labor movement does revitalize itself, it may be in a very different image than it existed 100 years ago. And to me, that's common sense. It's to say that because I do think I think the other side would paint my argument in a very depressing way, in saying, oh, well, workers have to pass this law through the Senate, which never happens, and that's the only way that they're ever going to have any success. And you want to keep these struggles in the courtrooms and not out on the shop floor and in the picket lines. Well, that's pretty depressing. That's not what I'm arguing. I think their argument is more depressing to me, because they're basically saying that that without some lightning bolt from above and another depression happening that's going to make workers feel like they have nothing to lose, that they're not going to be able to ever revive the labor movement. I think that there are still those avenues in place of, even if it's just, better funding the NLRB so that we can actually go out there and, run elections and investigate unfair labor practices, to a sufficient capacity. Organizing, or getting involved in your local politics, and, paying attention to what's happening in what kind of tax breaks is your local city council giving to this company to come in. Are they giving them a requirement to, speaking of the South, keep out or not voluntarily recognize unions, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically just an argument that politics matters. It did matter. It did help workers organize. Going forward, I do think that I think it's common sense that if you are able to muster the kind of political energies behind, getting rid of some of these, some of the more cumbersome aspects of the Taft-Hartley Act, you will see, if you get rid of, as was proposed in the PRO Act, if you get rid of the secondary boycott ban, you will see union power greatly increase. And so, I hate to say that the answer is just, get rid of the filibuster, pass the PRO Act, easy peasy. It's not what I'm saying. It's just more of the idea that, we as a populace, the United States in general, can have a say in, increasing worker bargaining power. It's not just waiting for, the great strikes of the 1930s to happen again from out of the blue. And I know that they would argue that, that means, that is, of course, something that happens from below, and it happens from a lot of, engagement and organizing. And they would argue, just ignore the federal government. I'm saying, don't ignore the federal government. Don't ignore the government's role in these things. Don't withdraw from the idea that, politics, laws matter. And I think you're more likely to see gains from that method than just, I don't know, pretending that the law doesn't matter and that it can't help workers in any single way, and that getting friendly legislators and governors and things in place to have, because by the time the sit-down strike happened, they had a friendly governor in place.
Right.
If they didn't, I think that strike could have happened a lot differently. Labor history would be a lot different today.
Right, and I think that the Virginia collective bargaining expansion that we were just talking about earlier in the show is a good example of how this matters and how law and policy can be a terrain for struggle. And speaking of, you kind of referenced Alabama's recent law making disincentivizing voluntary recognition. What it does is it would take away incentives, state subsidies from corporations that voluntarily recognize their employees' union. And there are some people that make the argument that this is a violation of the National Labor Relations Act. It's illegal. It's going to be overturned potentially, or at least it should be overturned. I think people that make this argument, they understand the state of the Supreme Court. But what do you think about that? Do you think that bills like or laws like SB 231 are actually a violation of the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution, and they're in violation of the National Labor Relations Act?
So, Jake, I don't want to comment too much, given my personal capacity. I don't want to comment specifically on that specific law. What I can tell you is what I know about labor law and generally. And I do know that states they have very little room.
Uh-oh. I think I think you froze up. I don't know if you're hearing me, but you froze.
That was the federal government.
Yeah.
They knew he was about to drop a juicy tidbit on us.
His boss was like, "You're commenting on law?"
Yeah,
No,
Jennifer Abruzzo
sir.
was
Yeah.
tuning in and was like, "No, sir, don't dive into that question. That's a trap." It is a really good conversation though we've been having, and it's interesting to think about these different angles to it. I kind of fall in the in between. I think you could argue that there was this wave of worker upsurge already in motion as the Wagner Act was taking place. In fact, it was that motion that landed us the Wagner Act, right? Because of the worker power and the mass mobilization, we were able to extract these concessions from the federal government. But that does matter when for 100 years the state had been firmly on the side of the employers, to call out troops against you, and now all of a sudden, in writing, they're like, actually, the unions are pretty good, and you should go do one.
Yeah.
That is a pretty drastic change, and it does matter, I think.
Right.
And that's not to hold out all of our hopes on legalism or changing the laws in Congress or whatever, but yeah, that's why.
Just a recognition that state power is important and can be used.
Yeah, it's a terrain of struggle. It
yeah.
is a terrain of struggle. 27,000 education employees in Fairfax County are looking at getting collective bargaining rights here in the next week or two.
Yeah.
That's a major expansion of their power, an expansion of democracy in the workplace. Wouldn't have happened without this change in the law. A whole lot of educators in Alabama sure would like to have what they're having. Right? Because we haven't had those legal changes. We've been moving in the opposite direction, unfortunately, here, with this voluntary recognition bill. And Dwayne had a good comment. Isn't one of the very basic tenets or essences of the NLRA to protect both employee and employer from outside influence in their abilities to negotiate? And doesn't Alabama SB 231 violate this basic tenet? So that's kind of what we were, broaching with Brandon before, the powers that be snatched him off the air or whatever, or just his Wi-Fi went out. But yeah, it's hard for me to say. I'm not a lawyer. I do expect that lawyers are going to be challenging this, and we'll see how it plays out. I mean, also the other factor here is our judges, right? The law is kind of what the last judge said it was. And we obviously don't have like a plethora of worker-friendly judges in this country, particularly down here in the South. So that is a little bit daunting as well to think about, even if on paper, our amateur understanding of the NLRA, it does seem to violate the spirit of it. That seems to be evident, but whether that's how it's actually going to play out in practice, I don't know. Because it is one of the legally, I mean, you only have two ways to get a union. One is a voluntary recognition, one is the election through the labor board. And this is taking that option off the table. I guess it doesn't forbid it, right? But by taking incentives away from the company, that is a hell of a disincentive. It's very, very frustrating because honestly, we should be moving in the opposite direction. Public spending should be uplifting the public good and growing the economy from the bottom up and rewarding those employers that do better. And so in my worldview, employers that voluntarily recognize their union should be ranked ahead of employers that fight their unions, right? And when we look at subsidies and incentives in economic development projects, those companies that treat their employees better should be, considered a little bit higher. And there's a big issue. Someone was just telling me about an issue this week. In fact, one of my union brothers was telling me about the fact that, like school districts, for example, when they bid out services, they have to go to the lowest bidder, right? So when Huntsville City Schools is renewing its bid for custodians or bus drivers, they have to go to the lowest bidder. They cannot consider other factors like how do they treat their employees? How much do they violate the law? How many children work there? How much pollution goes on? They can't look at it like a holistic picture. And if they could, right, if we had a responsible bidder ordinance in, various cities and states, like those things do make a difference. They do make a difference. And so I do think there's a lot of room and opportunity for the labor movement to make gains on policy. Simply just supporting one side and hope it turns out well is not a strategy. We have to be pushing effective policies at the local, state, and federal level everywhere we can and gaining ground everywhere we can. And pushing for like all the policy options on the table, everything from like drastic rewrite of the labor law with PRO Act to down to getting a responsible bidder ordinance in Colbert County, Alabama. That's the kind of things that we have to be doing because it is something that affects our members.
Yeah.
Some policies help us, some policies hurt us, and we need to be engaged with that.
All right. Well, Brandon did come back.
Okay, awesome.
But I think that we were winding down. So Brandon Magner, the Wagner Act defender. I don't know how much you like the title that I've given you, but I appreciate your time.
It does rhyme.
Do what?
It does rhyme, so
yes, it does. So how can you refuse the title since it rhymes? So yeah, Brandon, appreciate it. I think it was a good conversation. Seemed like folks enjoyed it. And is there anything else that you wanted to say before we let you go?
No, I apologize for my connection going away. 5 seconds, real quick. I'll just answer your question. Is the Supreme Court has said in the past that states are prohibited from passing laws that, for example, keep companies from getting subsidies if they violate workers' rights. That's a case called Chamber of Commerce v. Brown. I would be shocked if the opposite is legal. If you can pass laws that, for example, employers have the right to voluntarily recognize unions if they choose under the NLRA, if they can pass subsidies that punish that, I don't see how that can be squared with the that case. It's from 2008 that the Supreme Court issued, but with the courts the way they are these days, I guess maybe I shouldn't be too optimistic.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Well, appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Brandon.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
John Melrod had something come up, so he's not going to be able to make it, but that's fine. If anybody has this book, you can read it, and maybe you will have read the book by the time we bring him on. So we'll be getting with him to reschedule that. But
yeah, it's a bummer. I was looking forward to hearing from him. It looks really fascinating.
It's been endorsed by a lot of people.
I was about to say,
an inspiring guide for carrying the struggle forward, says Noam Chomsky. Wow. A handy blueprint for the next generation of fired up workers, labor organizers, and hellraisers, says Kim Kelly. We like Kim.
Yes.
Friend of the show, Kim Kelly.
That's right.
So yeah, it does give me the chance to finish reading it, though. I was about 70 pages away from finishing the book, so maybe now I'll be able to finish it the time he comes on. Then 844-899-TVLR is the phone number if anybody wants to call in. 844-899-8857. You can call in and we will take your calls. We talked about child labor a little bit, and another one of the topics that has been, in the news as far as it relates to, protections for working people has been heat protections. With climate change, heat, it's getting hotter. Every month is a record-breaking month. It's the hottest June on record. It's the hottest May on record. It's the hottest year on record. It's constantly we're getting records like this, and so.
Which, by the way, that's not good.
Yeah, not good. Not good that's happening.
Yeah, not the kind of records you want to break.
And also, I think I'm not, I don't know. I'm not a climate science guy. I don't really follow this kind of stuff, but I think I remember seeing that not only is the average temperature is increasing, but also the extremes are increasing, right? So you're getting hotter hot day. It's not just that every single day is 1 degree hotter than it was 100 years ago. It's like you're getting days that are hotter than you've ever seen more often, right? Mm-hmm. More often we're seeing 110 degree days in Texas than we did. And also we're more often seeing, negative 20 degree days in Texas than we used to see. I think. I don't know. Fact check it.
Yeah. It's very true that what used to be a storm of the century or a storm of the decade is now hell, we've had 3 this spring. It's those sorts of things where extreme weather is much more common. You're right. The extremes are more common. So when you're breaking these record highs more frequently, and all of that affects folks who work outside, who work in the heat, and a lot of people deal with the elements in their job in various ways, right? So many folks, from delivery drivers to farm workers to folks who are outdoors just for whatever job they do in the service industry or as a mechanic or anything, this heat can be deadly, and it does kill workers in this country every single year.
Mm-hmm. And so, one of the things that workers have tried to do, and Adam, could you bring your microphone closer to you, maybe, and then we can turn your mic back down, because I think you were coming in a little low, but now we're getting a worse echo again. So we're gonna have to do some technical rejiggering stuff after the show. But so the one of the things that workers have been trying to do in different communities has been to, you mentioned responsible bidder ordinances, to try to just generally make sure that workers have, the employers are being better and that is rewarded in the bidding process. Another thing has been heat protection ordinances. That's been something that particularly, municipalities in places like Texas and Florida have been trying to do, in saying that, look, if the temperature gets above this this temperature, then you have to give your employees more water breaks than normal, right? Like the standard is that you have to get, maybe a water break or a break every 4 to 8 hours or something like that. And well, if the temperature gets above 100 degrees, then you got to do it every 2 or 3 hours. And that's what a lot of these heat protection ordinances do. And they also, anyway, so that's what some of them do, and that seems, like many things as it relates to, working conditions and things like this, eminently reasonable. If you're working in 110-degree weather, you should probably get more breaks than if you're working in 70-degree weather, right? You should get breaks regardless, but you need to take more of them if it's 110 degrees. You need to drink more water if it's 110 degrees, right? So, eminently reasonable things. The people in charge of these states, in the state legislatures, in the state capitals, and in the governor's mansions say, oh, wow, we can't have that. We can't have people drinking water on the job if it's 110 degrees. And so they have passed in both Texas and Florida preemption laws that say that municipalities they can't pass these heat protection ordinances.
Right. Just like when we tried to raise the minimum wage city by city in Alabama, and after Birmingham successfully did it, the state legislature said, oh, no, preemption. You're not allowed, even though they're for small government.
Right.
They're all for small government, allegedly, but God forbid your local government do something that they don't like in the state legislature.
Yeah. Then they'll use the big state government to stop the municipal government from doing anything. So yeah, very bad. And so in another episode of this saga, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has intervened in these conversations to try to get heat protection ordinances in municipalities. And there's a conversation about a federal heat protection being added to the list of OSHA rules. And so the U.S. Chamber of Commerce says, whoa, can't do that. We don't want that. And get this, they say it's because some workers have exceptional tolerance for high temperatures, and therefore the federal government should continue to let people unnecessarily die on the job from extreme heat. That's their argument. They say, quote, from Mark Friedman, vice president at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the country's largest business lobbying group, vampires and lizards and all that kind of stuff, said, quote, it is extraordinarily difficult for them to determine when heat presents a hazard because each employee experiences heat differently. And so therefore, a substantial barrier that creates a substantial barrier to efforts to determine when employees require protection.
I mean, you could say that about anything. Really. We all experience pain differently.
Right.
But at a certain level, some stuff hurts, and shouldn't be avoided. Okay, come on now, be real.
Different people get black lung at different rates. Some people can be in the mines for 40 years and never get black lung. And so, can we really regulate this kind of stuff? It's difficult.
Right. Everyone experiences it differently.
Yeah, so it's difficult. So that's their argument. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce says, what's the deal with differences?
Yeah. Some people are willing to say absolute nonsense for an agenda, and that's a good example of that.
Yeah. So, and as a response to this tweet, the communications person for the United Farm Workers actually replied, citing a story from August of last year where the National Cotton Council was also making a crazy argument, almost even, even worse than the one that the Chamber of Commerce was making. And so the National Cotton Council said that heat injuries are due to, quote, present-day luxuries such as air conditioning, present-day luxury, air conditioning, making it more difficult for workers to face the severe change in temperature. So that's one reason that people are dying, is just because we're a bunch of sissies today, because we have air conditioning and now we can't take it. And so I guess the National Cotton Council, the implication there is that we should take away air conditioning from farm workers, right? I mean, like, what else could you draw from that?
Right. Yeah. That's the problem is folks got it so good these days. Yeah, if they lived outside,
right,
they'd be used to being outside, and it wouldn't bother them as much. Is what it sounds like to me.
That's what it sounds like.
It's pretty gross.
Another one that they said is younger workers are used to a more sedentary lifestyle.
Now, I just wonder about the folks who run the National Cotton Council. What kind of lifestyle do they have? And
you don't think that
what kind of present day luxuries might they enjoy?
You don't think that the people at the National Cotton Council are also picking cotton?
Yeah, I'm skeptical. I'm a little skeptical. I think they may enjoy present day luxuries beyond even air conditioning and like roofs. Yeah, and water. They probably enjoy a lot of luxuries, if I had to guess, including whatever corporate hack wrote this statement for them.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of crazy. So anyway, the bosses, that's the new position of the bosses is that people are different, so we can't really have regulations because people are different. Also, we need to take away air conditioning from workers. We need to have them live outside so that they're used to being outside. And also, young workers are more sedentary, unlike the people who run the National Cotton Council. And so we should also, in addition to making them live outside without air conditioning, we should have them be on a treadmill for like 3 hours a day.
Don't give them any ideas.
I mean, I'm not giving them. That's just what they're saying. That's just the implication of the.
Yeah.
So yeah, there we go. Crazy stuff. I mean, it's wild the things that the bosses will say. But they're saying it. So I want to make sure that you know that they're saying it.
Yeah, and it's very frustrating to see state politicians intervene, like use the force of the state to go against their own local governments to prevent workers from taking water breaks.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, when you lay it out like that, it's pretty remarkable. Like, that's what you're spending your time, your energy, your resources on, your political capital. You're intervening. You're pushing back against other local elected officials so that folks don't have to be made to take a water break. I mean, it's how I just wonder how many folks will suffer as a result of this in those jurisdictions. You know, it's only a matter of time before someone falls out.
Well, I mean, I think if I remember correctly, it was like within a week or a month that Florida signed its preemption bill that somebody died from a heat stroke.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a statistical inevitability. So, you know, and that's on their hands. Like, you got to think, like, could it have been avoided? And there again, you know, that's where policies can make a big difference. And why we need more working people engaged in policy. Because these policies that they create for us from the government, they're not for working people. They're for our bosses and employers. It's for the wealthiest of the wealthy, the tiny, tiny elite who profit off this system.
Yeah.
And all of us are the reason why this system continues to churn day after day, right? It's our labor. So yeah, it's really frustrating as this world is getting hotter. We need to be dealing with the climate crisis, and like, this is just like the lowest hanging of fruit is providing water breaks for folks during heat. We've got so much more work to do when it comes to addressing this climate crisis. You know, with every year being a record hot year, you know, the amount of investment that we need to be taking. I know that the Biden administration likes to brag about the investments it made through, you know, the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act and all this and that, the Infrastructure Act. And yeah, there's a lot of, you know, positive investments, but it's like not even near the scale that we need.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk about all the work that needs to be done in this country and in this world, but in this country to address the climate crisis and the broader like environmental catastrophe that we have been building, we need a lot of people. I know Green New Deal is like a controversial thing apparently to say, but something like that, right? Where we have a massive expansion of the public sector. We put a lot of people to work, doing a lot of good work that's important to our infrastructure and our environment, right? People putting solar panels on top of buildings, people planting trees, people fighting forest fires, people upgrading our electrical grid, people expanding public transportation. We need all that kind of stuff happening. But yeah, we also need heat breaks. We also need those. Yeah, I guess it does feel daunting when you think about all of what we do need to be doing. Because like all those policies I just mentioned, those are just scratching the surface, really. Like, I think it's a very open question as to whether capitalism can actually resolve or address the climate crisis. I certainly have my thoughts about it, but, just as a very like immediate, like what should we be doing now? Even the United Nations and pretty mainstream organizations have been pretty clear we should be disinvesting from fossil fuels like now, like ASAP, no more. So yeah,
right.
A lot of work to be done. All that because some jerk politicians don't want to let us have heat breaks.
Yeah. So to wrap up, we'll talk about this story. We'll kind of riff on the story from Mercedes a little bit more, and some of the fallout around it. I talked about in last week in Southern Labor how Mercedes hired some 11 consultants from 3 different consulting firms to aid in their anti-union campaign, trying to convince their employees to vote against the UAW, and the going rate for those, and this is public information. The going rate for those types of consultants are $3,200 per consultant per day. Right? That's the going rate. And so now for some reason, the reporting requirements are such that Mercedes does not have to disclose how much they spent yet, but they do have to disclose how many people there were. But they didn't have to disclose that until after the election. They did not have to disclose that until after the election.
How's that for a free election?
Yeah. So, and they still do not know how much the company spent on the anti-union stuff. And so we'll see next year when that reporting requirement is due. But it could easily have been, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. That would not be an uncommon amount of money to have spent on an anti-union campaign. Indeed, Amazon spent $14 million in 1 year on anti-union consultants. Right? So, this
they could have just...
Yeah.
It's like... At some point, you start doing the math, and you're like, you're spending more fighting it than you would have just sitting down at the table and negotiating a fair deal. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that, $14 million is how much it would have cost to land a new contract or anything like that. But it really is baffling. And it shows you how much it's about power, right? Not just about... Because people always just go to the assumption that, well, unions raise wages for the members, for the workers, and the bosses don't want to pay more, and so therefore they fight the unions to keep lower wages. And there's some truth to that, obviously, but it's not just about the wages and just about the money. It's also about the power, because when you have a union in the workplace and you have a collective bargaining agreement, there's no longer unilateral, unquestioned authority from management. There is accountability now. There is input from the workers. There is agreements in writing that both sides have compromised on and both sides agree they're going to follow. And so that degree of power sharing is what really is the animating force behind anti-union campaigns, right? Because you'll see where Mercedes was willing to give pay raises to try to keep the union out. They were willing to make dramatic economic concessions, right? They did a lot of the things that the workers were asking for in terms of reducing the two-tier system and bringing up wages and that kind of thing. And they were willing to make those concessions because it was on their terms. They control it. They get to make that decision. They can undo that decision if and when they feel like it. And they didn't actually have to share any of the power in making that decision. So that's really, power is what it's about. Yes, money is a big part of it, but money is just a source of power, right? And so I think power is what really animates these union busting campaigns. It's why they're willing to spend so much money on it. Mm-hmm. Even if, there are cases every year where relatively small companies go out and spend tons of money on these lawyers and consultants. It is irrational in some cases, because you think like, okay, well, what's going to happen if you don't fight this union? What's going to happen? Okay, well, maybe the workers vote yes. Okay, so the worst that could happen is that the workers get what they're asking for in terms of representation. And then you have to sit down at the table and negotiate a fair deal with them. Like, yeah, right. It's not the end of the world, right? The companies can be very profitable with union workforces. Ford is doing quite well, even after, having to make some concessions to UAW. Ford is still fine. AT&T has a unionized workforce. They're fine, so it's just, but tying it back into the policy discussion we've been having today, though, I mean, so much of what is allowed in union busting and in anti-union campaigns would not have been allowed under the Wagner Act or would not be allowed in other countries.
Right. Yeah. And so that gets us to the Harvard Law School's Center for Labor and a Just Economy. They just released a report with some recommendations for the Labor Department to try to combat some of these things. And those recommendations come on the heels of the election in Mercedes, where they hired 11 anti-union consultants, still to be determined how much they paid for that. Potentially, I'm interested in if one of those 11 consultants was the company preacher. I'd be interested in how much he got paid.
Yeah, that would be interesting to find out.
But they also come on the heels of an investigation, according to the Huffington Post. Reporter Dave Jameson at the Huffington Post said that the recommendations come on the heels of an investigation by the Labor Department's Inspector General, finding that the agency did not effectively enforce the law when it came to anti-union consultants. And so there's like stuff on the books now that's not really being enforced. And so there was this is crazy. This is crazy stuff. So he said that Huffington Post investigation last year revealed that employers and consultants alike routinely flout rules and leave workers in the dark amid these pressure campaigns. Employees often have no idea how much money was spent to convince them not to unionize, and sometimes they don't even know who the consultants were who lobbied them. In one case that the Huffington Post reported, a consultant held anti-union meetings with workers under a fake name after having recently been released from prison for stalking. That's crazy. That's absolutely wild. And so, yeah, so part of the problem is that there's rules that are on the books that they're just ignoring. They're just not paying attention to. They're just saying, we don't really have to, it's not really that big of a deal. So the Labor Department's Inspector General found that nearly half of employers' reports and 80% of consultants' reports were delinquent over a 2.5-year period, resulting in missing, untimely, and inaccurate information during union campaigns. Imagine that, 80% of the consultants' reports being delinquent. The consultants, this is their job. This is their whole ass thing
And 80% of the time, they are delinquent in these reports. That's their whole job, is to know labor law and to help the companies comply with it so that they don't run afoul of the law, or at least so that they don't run afoul of the law in any way that would actually be meaningful. And that's why 80%, because they know the law. They know that it's not meaningful to be delinquent in these reports, and so they are delinquent in these reports because it doesn't matter. That's the thing. And so one of the ways that the laws are not being enforced is that it used to be that consultants were required to submit an annual report that detailed all of their receipts from employers, as well as the money that they dispersed to their subcontractors. But back in 2016, the Labor Department stopped enforcing key portions of those requirements. This report from the Harvard Law School's, Labor and a Just Economy, whatever, said that they should return to that. There are also some other recommendations. So they had 4 recommendations specifically coming straight from that report. The first one is that the Department of Labor should rescind the Form LM-21 Special Enforcement Policy and clarify that Form LM-21 requires the reporting of receipts and disbursements from labor relations advice as well as persuasion activity. So this is just going back to that old pre-2016 enforcement policy. You got to report your receipts. Not unreasonable. Number 2, require employers who must complete LM-10 forms to indicate if they receive federal financial support in form of grants, loans, or loan guarantees.
Ooh,
that's interesting.
Yes,
yeah, we should know. We should know, for instance, how much a freak company like Littler Mendelson is getting from our tax dollars. That's something that we should know about. Number 3, the Department of Labor should take new action to expand the scope of employer reporting on Form LM-10. And number 4, the Federal Trade Commission should investigate whether union avoidance firms facilitate unlawful conspiracies between competing employers to hold down wages and prevent unionization. And now this is an interesting argument because, the union avoidance industry, the anti-union, union-busting industry, it's not as if Littler Mendelson only advises Amazon. Right? Littler Mendelson is not an Amazon law firm. Littler Mendelson advises Amazon, and they also advise, I'm speaking hypothetically. Do they actually advise Amazon? I don't know. But I'm just saying they advise multiple employers, right? So if you've got Littler Mendelson here, and I'm Littler Mendelson, and I'm advising Amazon and FedEx and DHL to all do the same thing in service of keeping wages low, there's a very real argument for that. That should be investigated. There's a very real argument for, is this unlawful conspiracies? Because it would be illegal for Amazon and DHL and FedEx to all get in a room and say, okay, guys, hey, you're only going to pay your people $15 an hour, right? You're only going to pay them $14 an hour, right? Yeah, Amazon, don't worry. I'm only going to pay them $14 an hour. I'm not going to go above that. And you're not going to do it either, DHL? No, I'm not going to do it either. That would be illegal. That would be illegal conspiracy to do that. And so, is it the case under the Federal Trade Commission, is it the case that Littler Mendelson is only acting as a middleman to facilitate this unlawful conspiracizing? That's an interesting argument that I had never thought of, but there's some stuff. There's something to that.
Right. If the Biden administration and the FTC wanted to take a strong stand, they could certainly look into it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they could explore it. They could investigate. They could see where the facts lie.
Yep.
I think that would be a step in the right direction. Throw us a small bone there.
Yep. All right. You have anything else?
Just I wanted to remind folks about our plugs. Again, that Wednesday, June 5th, will be our in-person fundraiser in Huntsville at St. Stephen's Music Hall in Huntsville, Alabama, Campus 805. Definitely check it out. I believe music is starting around 6:30 p.m. The film will start around 7. There will be some Q&A afterwards and more music after that. labornotes.org/events. Check out their online training. If you're not following Labor Notes and you listen to this show, what are you doing? You should definitely follow Labor Notes. Get on their email list, do their trainings. Really appreciate all that they do. And again, on June 10th, I will be partnering with Jennifer Shearer from the Economic Policy Institute for a Unions 101 for Sweet Home Alabama webinar. It's going to be hosted by the League of Women Voters of Alabama, I believe 6 o'clock that evening, June 10th. You can search League of Women Voters of Alabama, find them on social media. You'll see the link to it. Make sure you register in advance, but that's a really good class. Big fan of Jennifer and this presentation she does. So if you are listening and you are sympathetic to unions but don't really know a whole lot about how they operate, or you're sympathetic but maybe some of the stuff we talked about today went over your head, Unions 101 would be a great one. But also, if you know any workers or progressive allies who don't know a whole lot about unions, but you think would be curious, maybe for their own workplace or just to understand, how unions fit in a broader progressive movement and moment in this country, definitely check that out. So again, that's June 10th, hosted by the League of Women Voters of Alabama. And besides that, just really appreciate everyone who supports us, appreciate all the likes, the shares, and subscribes, and reviews, all that good stuff. It really does help. Thank you, of course, to our donors, all of you who donate individually, whether it's just a one-off here or there, or if you make a monthly recurring donation, or if you've purchased our merch. Really do appreciate it. We're a grassroots operation, and so every dollar counts, and we appreciate it. We're trying to get the word out, trying to amplify the voices of working people here in the South. If you appreciate what we're doing, if you agree with what we're doing, just pitch in and try to support us.
Yep. You can subscribe to our newsletters at tvlr.fm/contact. Last Week in Southern Labor and Boss Watch, right in your email inbox every single week. And sometimes, and for the people who listen to the program, we do, after the program every week, we send an email to the unions that are mentioned in the new elections and election results. And so sometimes we get statements from those unions, and we include them in the Last Week in Southern Labor in the newsletter, but we don't, that's not something that we get to during the show because we don't send out that email until after the show. So that's like newsletter exclusive content sometimes that we get every week that you're not going to hear anywhere else. What are the unions saying about their campaigns? Only get that from our newsletter, Last Week in Southern Labor. You can subscribe at tvlr.fm/contact. You can support the show. You can make a one-time or monthly recurring contribution at tvlr.fm/donate. You can buy our merch like our new or like our restock of our logo cap, union made obviously in the USA, $35 plus shipping at tvlr.fm/store. Appreciate everybody tuning in. We'll see you next week.